Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Milica van Doorn. Milica grew up in a typical family with her parents and two sisters in Zaanstad, a city in North Holland, Netherlands. Milica was a well-behaved child who stayed out of trouble and was friendly to everyone. Having just graduated from high school with a good reputation, she was looking forward to a bright future. However, her life took a dramatic turn one summer evening. That summer night changed everything for Milica, and her story became a national sensation. On the evening of Sunday, June 7, 1992, Milica attended a birthday party for a friend, which was held in an apartment in a local building. The building looked almost the same back then as it does today, except for the taller trees that surround it. Milica left her birthday celebration early to catch the last bus home, but when she arrived at the bus stop, she realized she had missed it by 30 minutes. Unbeknownst to her, the bus schedule had been adjusted due to the Pentecost holiday. She had another option to get home than taking the train from the station located half a mile away on the same street. However, she never come home. The next morning, the pastor of St. Joseph's Church, which is near the train station, made a disturbing discovery while on his morning walk. He found a body floating in a pond adjacent to the church and immediately called the police at 8:54 a.m. Within minutes, detectives arrived at the scene, and the tragic news was soon delivered to the Van Doorn family, leaving them in a state of shock and grief. Milica's body was pulled from the water, bearing signs of a violent crime. Injuries on her neck, face, and body, including multiple stab wounds, were evident. She was also found partially undressed. In an attempt to conceal the crime, the perpetrator had covered the body with reeds, but this effort failed, leading to its discovery. The news of Milica's tragic death was devastating for her family, who had envisioned a bright future for her. The autopsy provided some information about the crime. The presence of semen and pubic hair in Milica's body suggested a sexual assault. The fact that there was no water in Milica's lungs indicated that she did not drown in the pond. Instead, she had likely been killed elsewhere, and her body was later hidden in the water in an attempt to disguise the crime. The exact time of Milica's death remained unclear, with possibilities ranging from immediately after she left a party to several hours later. Milica's body was found in the water, which made it impossible to determine the time of death by body temperature alone. The pond was where her body was dumped, but it was not the location where she was actually killed. The police were searching for the original crime scene, where they expected to find evidence due to the severity of Milica's injuries. A key piece of evidence was that one of her shoes was missing, which could potentially lead investigators to both the crime scene and the perpetrator. The police distributed flyers with information about the case, including the fact that one of Milica's shoes was missing. They asked the public to report if the shoe was found, and eventually, the second shoe was discovered. At the time of the investigation in 1992, DNA research was not advanced, and DNA samples taken from Milica's body did not provide any useful leads for the detectives. The investigation began with interviews with Milica's family to determine if she had any conflicts or enemies. However, the family reported that Milica had no conflicts with anyone and was doing well personally. She had a boyfriend around her age, and they rarely fought. After learning that Milica attended a birthday party on the night she died, investigators spoke to all the guests, including her boyfriend. However, numerous interviews did not produce any leads, and everyone reported the same story that Milica had left the party just before midnight and planned to take a bus to her neighborhood. Unfortunately, none of Milica's friends were aware that the last bus had already departed by the time she reached the bus stop. In 1992, mobile phones were not widespread, making it difficult for investigators to determine if Milica had boarded the bus or reached her destination safely. After ruling out her friends as suspects, the police began searching for witnesses who may have seen or heard something on the night of the crime. They conducted door-to-door interviews with residents in the area where Milica's body was found, gathering a significant amount of information, but few specific details. Several witnesses reported hearing a woman scream briefly at night, but it was not alarming enough to prompt them to take action. Others claimed to have seen a man of Turkish appearance riding a bicycle towards the location where Milica's body was discovered. As a result, investigators shifted their focus to the Turkish community living in the Kogerveld neighborhood. Some young men from the Turkish community had previous run-ins with the law, drawing the attention of investigators. However, despite months of inquiry, the police were unable to identify a suspect. The men they questioned denied being near the pond on the night of the crime, leading to a stalemate in the investigation. 6 months after Milica van Doorn's murder, a significant discovery was made when a roofer working on the roof of St. Joseph's Church found one of Milica's shoes. This shoe had been on the roof the entire time, but it was unclear how it got there since the only way to access the roof was by ladder. The conclusion was that the perpetrator must have deliberately thrown the shoe onto the roof while at the pond, but the reasoning behind this action remains a mystery. Unfortunately, any potential evidence that may have been left on the roof was erased by harsh weather conditions over time. Years went by, and Milica's case remained unsolved, causing immense pain for her parents. Despite the passing of time, the police revisited Milica's case, conducting multiple interviews with local residents in an attempt to uncover new information. Additionally, the case was featured on several television programs, which led to an influx of calls from the public with potential leads. However, none of these efforts resulted in a breakthrough, and the identity of the suspect remains unknown. The authorities had the perpetrator's DNA samples on file, waiting for a breakthrough in testing technology. By analyzing these samples, forensic experts inferred that the perpetrator was likely a male of Turkish origin, residing in the Kogerveld area in 1992, and aged between 16 and 30 years at the time of the crime. To narrow down the search, nearly 200 men from the area voluntarily provided cheek swabs for DNA testing, but unfortunately, this effort did not yield a match. Almost 20 years after Milica's murder, a significant breakthrough occurred in April 2012. The Netherlands amended a law making it possible to conduct DNA kinship testing. By analyzing the autopsy results, evidence, and the perpetrator's behavior, investigators created a psychological profile of the suspect. The profile suggested that the perpetrator was a resentful and frustrated individual, angry at women in general. Milica was likely an accidental victim who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The perpetrator may have had a brief conversation with Milica before attacking her violently and threatening her. After satisfying his urges, he killed her to prevent her from identifying him. For several weeks after the crime, he kept a low profile, possibly pretending to be ill to avoid social interactions and conceal the scratches he sustained during the struggle with Milica. The police profiler described the suspect as a hot-tempered, selfish, and critical individual with few friends, poor relationships with girlfriends, and an inability to handle criticism. Based on this profile, investigators estimated that the perpetrator was between 18 and 25 years old in 1992. In April 2016, investigators reopened the case of Milica van Doorn, which had gone cold for over 20 years. A new lead emerged in June 2016, when a report was filed mentioning the names of 2 Turkish men who had lived in Zaanstad in 1992, around the time of Milica's death. Notably, both men had left the area shortly after the incident. The police aimed to determine if these 2 individuals were connected to the crime. Tracking them down proved challenging, and it took over a year to locate them in Turkey and obtain the necessary DNA samples. Finally, the DNA analysis did not yield a match with the DNA evidence found on Milica's body. In 2017, authorities used DNA typing technology to re-examine the Milica case. As a result, the police contacted 133 men of Turkish origin who lived in the area where the body was found in 1992, asking for voluntary DNA samples to compare to the crime scene DNA. The goal was to analyze the Y chromosome pattern, which is passed from father to son, to identify potential relatives of the perpetrator. The authorities assured the men that their DNA would only be used for this case and would be destroyed afterward. Most of the 133 men agreed to provide a DNA sample, only a few refused. A total of 126 men participated in the study. The police appreciated their cooperation, saying it was a testament to the community's desire for justice. After a month of analysis, the results showed that the DNA of the original perpetrator was not among the samples. However, the DNA of a man who was unknowingly related to the perpetrator was found. On Monday, December 10, 2017, the police arrested the suspect who had evaded capture for 25 years. The man, 47-year-old Hussein, had refused to submit his DNA for verification, but a clever investigation led to his downfall. Since local laws prohibit sharing suspects' personal information, his full identity and photo were not made public. A breakthrough in the case came when investigators cross-checked DNA profiles of relatives, focusing on those who, like Hussein, had refused to provide a sample. Coincidentally, Hussein's brother had willingly provided his DNA to the authorities, unaware of its potential impact on his sibling. This helped the investigators build a list of people connected to Hussein through family ties, ultimately revealing his identity as the suspect who had managed to stay hidden for nearly 2.5 decades. The police obtained a warrant to take a DNA sample from Hussein without his permission. A comparison with the DNA samples from Milica's body showed a perfect match, providing strong evidence against him. As a result, Hussein was formally charged with the crime. During his 2018 trial, Hussein claimed he was not guilty. Initially, he said he was possessed by an evil spirit and couldn't remember the attack. Later, he changed his story, saying he had a secret relationship with Milica, which is why his DNA was found on her body. He claimed he had to keep the relationship a secret because he had recently gotten married. However, the judge didn't believe Hussein's new claim for 2 reasons. Firstly, he only made this statement a year after his arrest, and secondly, no one could confirm that Milica and Hussein even knew each other, let alone had an intimate relationship. Milica's family testified during the trial. Milica's sister spoke directly to the suspect, saying that he had kept silent for years, hadn't cooperated with the police when they asked for a DNA test, and had continued living freely in the neighborhood. She accused him of going on to start a family and have had 4 daughters and called him a monster who had ruined Milica's life. She expressed her disgust that there were men like him who used and exploited women, treated them like trash, and then simply moved on with their lives. The other sister expressed her disappointment and frustration that Hussein had not taken responsibility for his actions or shown remorse. Instead, he had made a surprising claim of a secret relationship with the victim and complained about his own family struggles. She pointed out that Hussein's family could visit him in prison if they wished, but she could only visit her sister's grave. She hoped for justice, believing that her sister deserved it after meeting a terrible end. It was a deeply emotional day for Milica van Doorn's family. When her father was given the opportunity to speak, he was filled with anger and said that Hussein's silence for 25 years was cowardly. He found Hussein's treatment of Milica to be extremely disturbing and was shocked by the news of her death. On December 11, 2018, Hussein was found guilty of Milica's murder based on DNA evidence. The court determined that the murder was committed to cover up another crime, a sex crime. Hussein was sentenced to 20 years in prison and ordered to pay €10,000 in compensation to Milica's family. Notably, Hussein refused to be present in the courtroom during the sentencing and instead remained in a cell outside. In February 2019, Hussein appealed his 20-year prison sentence and it was reduced to 19 years and 7 months. But finally, he did not get to serve the full reduced term. Hussein was found dead on June 13, 2022. According to his lawyer, he died shortly after exercising despite receiving emergency medical treatment. The attempts to revive him were unsuccessful. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michael Redlich. Danielle was born in 1976 in Florida. Her family later moved to Cleveland, Ohio. She grew up kind and well-mannered with a creative nature. Danielle was the eldest child and appreciated beauty from a young age. She attended Valencia College and later enrolled in the psychology department at Baldwin Wallace University in 1996. Her mother, Caitlin Aquino, remarried with Michael but passed away from cancer after a short 2-year marriage. Caitlin, battling breast cancer, received high-quality care due to her Michael's insurance. They formally married for medical benefits, but the treatment was unsuccessful. After her death, her husband, Michael Redlich, raised their children alone. At 22, Danielle, the eldest daughter, returned home to help, bringing her brother and sister with her to live with Michael. Danielle later made the unexpected decision to marry her stepfather, Michael. Started as a friend in 2019. Danielle cared for the younger kids and worked at a bar at night, while Michael built his sports recruitment career. He became attached to the children and felt comfortable with Danielle, who saw him as a dependable support despite their 20-year age difference. Their easy and natural interaction gradually brought them closer together. Danielle initially kept her relationship with Michael hidden from her family. With Michael, she felt loved and protected. He found her a job at an advertising agency, had a high income, and devoted time to the family. Things were going well for both. When Michael received the job offer to become the Memphis Grizzlies vice president, he asked Danielle to move with him, but she hesitated. Danielle declined to join Michael due to her studies and familiar lifestyle, but they continued their long-distance relationship. One day, Michael showed her a cottage he bought for them by the Mississippi River, impressing her with its picturesque location. She eventually moved in, and Michael found her a job in radio. Initially, everything was perfect, but Michael's job later brought changes. Michael's new position brought increased stress and tension with management. He became stressed and tired, often unwinding with alcohol, which became a daily habit. He'd return home late, intoxicated, and angry. Danielle tried to support him, but his promises to stop were short-lived. After missing a planned dinner, tension between them grew. Danielle was upset, saying if he couldn't make time for her, he should have warned her. Danielle made a joke, which struck a nerve with Michael, and he slapped her across the face, causing her to stagger back. Her clothes and the floor were bloodied. In shock, she recoiled as Michael cried and apologized. He took her to a sports doctor, who provided first aid and recommended seeing a dentist and plastic surgeon due to the severity of her injuries, including a chipped front tooth. The next day, Michael made amends with a thoughtful dinner, showering his wife with attention and care. Despite the previous day's incident, she forgave him and chose not to report it, aware of the strict domestic violence laws in their state. This wasn't the first warning sign, however. Danielle had already experienced similar behavior from Michael before the incident. In 2003, Michael and Danielle had a daughter named Jaden. A year later, they decided to formalize their relationship. Life was going well for them, but Michael still faced obstacles at work due to a change in management, which prevented him from getting a long-awaited promotion. 7 years later, their son Sawyer was born, and both of two devoted themselves to raising their children. However, Michael's work struggles and added responsibilities took a toll on him, triggering a return to drinking and more frequent conflicts with Danielle. Michael's behavior finally reached a boiling point during an argument in which he physically attacked Danielle, grabbing her by the throat and holding her against the wall. The incident was incredibly frightening for Danielle. She realized she could no longer tolerate Michael's rough behavior and made the difficult decision to leave him, taking the children with her. Danielle moved in with her relatives, who had initially been skeptical of her marriage to Michael but had grown to accept it over time. In an attempt to win her back, Michael visited Danielle multiple times, apologized for his actions, and asked her to return home. After a period of separation, they eventually reconciled and restored their relationship. The years following were marked by uncertainty. The Redlick family relocated to California for 5 years, but struggled with Michael's drinking habit. After losing their jobs, they relied on savings until moving to Indiana in 2014, seeking a fresh start and stability. Michael moved first, while Danielle stayed behind in California with the children. They needed time to sell their old home and belongings, a process that took a year. The constant relocating had taken a toll on the family, especially the children, who struggled to adapt to their new surroundings. Meanwhile, the family's financial situation improved, but the distance between Danielle and Michael began to affect their marriage. They grew apart, communicating less and less, as the infrequent visits took a strain on their relationship. Danielle and Michael faced new challenges after reuniting. Danielle noticed Michael's emotional distance and dwindling romantic connection. In reality, Michael was struggling with personal issues related to age and health, affecting his intimate life. He confessed his struggles to Danielle, fearing rejection, but she responded with empathy and reassured him of her support. After trying various medications, they decided to try hormone injections. With the testosterone injections, Michael experienced a resurgence in his physical and mental health. He regained the energy and vitality of his younger years. However, this newfound energy also led to increased aggression. One evening, while Danielle was brushing her teeth, Michael attacked her in the bathroom. His reasoning for this violent outburst was that she had failed to wake him up when she went to rest the previous evening. Danielle was fed up with the situation and decided to leave. However, this only infuriated her husband, who then choked her. Danielle was unable to defend herself and started to lose consciousness. She felt like she was on the verge of death. When she eventually came to, she saw her husband standing over her, looking scared and confused, and begging for forgiveness. All Danielle could manage to do was to silently crawl away from him. Following this incident, they continued to live together in the same house and raise their children, but their relationship was irreparably altered. Apparently, the situation at home had reached a breaking point. Michael's drinking problem worsened, leading to more frequent arguments over small issues. These disputes often turned violent, causing stress and fear for the family. Despite her unhappiness and resentment, she remained in the relationship, still deeply loving her husband. Their daughter Danielle also suffered, becoming anxious and withdrawn. She took up photography as a hobby to distract herself from her troubles. Despite their issues, the Redlick family appeared to be a respectable family to outsiders, as they generally kept their disagreements private. By the end of 2014, the family had finally settled in Florida. Around this time, Michael decided to change careers, seeking a less stressful profession. He started working as the Director of External Affairs and Partnership Programs at the University of Central Florida and also began teaching. Although Michael's post-MBA career income was lower, the job provided him with a sense of fulfillment and stability. The family initially rented a home in Winter Park but eventually purchased a large, Mediterranean-style house in the area. The house had a unique feature, an attic floor that Danielle claimed as her own private retreat, often retreating there on nights when Michael's anger issues flared up. As Michael received testosterone injections, their intimate life briefly improved, but even in these moments, he could be emotionally harsh. Their relationship remained strained, and Danielle turned to alcohol to cope. With Michael working and providing for the family, Danielle managed the household and children, but her dependency worsened, and she became increasingly withdrawn. The frequent arguments eventually led to their separation in 2016. Despite Michael's controlling behavior, Danielle continued to allow him to see the children and provide financial support. As Danielle began working at a school, she started to regain her independence with the help of new friends. They helped her overcome her depression, but she still maintained a relationship with Michael, giving him unrestricted access to her life. This arrangement ultimately led to another violent argument, resulting in Danielle's hospitalization with a concussion. Fearing repercussions for Michael, she kept quiet about the incident. However, on this occasion, Michael took Danielle's silence as a sign that she would continue to tolerate his behavior. When questioned, Danielle revealed a shocking incident that had occurred in early October 2016. Michael had attempted to run her over with his car, but she narrowly escaped by jumping into the bushes. This incident prompted Danielle to visit the police department, but when detectives started asking detailed questions, she became hesitant and left without filing a report. The reason for their initial separation was the same as before, but they eventually reconciled and returned to their shared home. However, this decision ultimately proved disastrous for both of them. On January 12, 2019, at approximately 9 a.m., a 911 call was placed. During the call, a woman identifying herself as Danielle Redlick reported that her husband, Michael, had suffered a fatal heart attack. When the rescue service arrived, they noticed a strong smell of cleaning agent and a bucket of pink-colored water at the entrance to the living room. Michael lay on the floor in a pool of blood, lifeless, with a penetrating knife wound. Michelle, who made the call, had cuts on her wrists and was taken to the hospital after receiving first aid. The police investigation revealed that Michael Redlick's life had been taken, and forensic analysis confirmed the blood traces belonged to the deceased. The pink liquid was diluted blood, and someone had tried to erase a trail from the bedroom to the living room. Despite cleaning efforts, blood spatter was found on walls and corners, and a large knife was discovered at the kitchen entrance, with 3 smaller knives in the sink. Detectives questioned Danielle after her injuries were deemed non-life-threatening. She changed her story multiple times, initially claiming her husband died of heart disease, then saying he took his own life after an argument. Experts disputed this, citing the difficulty of self-inflicting such a wound and the usual preference for simpler methods. The autopsy revealed Michael died from blood loss, which could have been prevented with timely medical help. He also had a lacerated eye and high levels of alcohol in his system. An investigation found that Michael and Danielle had an argument days before the incident, witnessed by their daughter Jaden. Michael had been drinking and burst into the bathroom where Danielle was hiding, but Jaden intervened and took the bottle away. Danielle left the house and returned after Michael fell asleep. Jaden said it was the first time she'd seen her father so angry, but he apologized multiple times and was normally a loving father. The next day, they reconciled and attended a soccer game, but Danielle appeared upset and barely spoke. That evening, Danielle and her husband dropped off their kids at a friend's house for a sleepover, leaving them alone for the night. Later, Danielle stopped by McDonald's to pick up dinner and returned home around 10:30 p.m. When she arrived, she found her husband intoxicated. During dinner, Danielle received a text message from an unknown number. Her husband saw the message, became enraged, and physically attacked her, attempting to strangle her. In an effort to defend herself, Danielle grabbed a nearby knife and stabbed her husband in the chest. He fell to the ground, bleeding heavily. Danielle claimed that she immediately called for emergency assistance, but accidentally dialed the wrong number. An investigation later confirmed her account of events. Danielle explained that she lied to the 911 operator and during interrogation because she was afraid of not being believed that she had acted in self-defense. This fear was partly due to prior incidents that had damaged her credibility with authorities. She had recently been involved in a physical altercation with friends and had also resisted arrest when police arrived at the scene of the incident, even attempting to bite an officer. Her uncooperative behavior during the investigation led to charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. As a result, she worried that her claims of self-defense would be met with skepticism. Danielle was on probation for about a year. The cuts on her wrists were self-inflicted but superficial, leading investigators to doubt her claim of trying to end her life due to emotional turmoil. They also found she wasn't a role model, because she having signed up on a dating site and being unfaithful after learning of Michael's infidelity. Analysis of messages between Michael and Danielle showed she still loved him, but felt betrayed and disillusioned after learning of his affairs and plans to leave her. She was heartbroken, feeling he didn't appreciate her dedication. The prosecution used this against her. The prosecutor claimed the crime was premeditated in a fit of rage due to Michael's infidelity and impending divorce. Neighbors confirmed their loud arguments often turned physical. While Michael was described as kind and helpful, Danielle was seen as quarrelsome. Video evidence showed her acting irrationally and attacking others. Danielle's lawyer claimed her actions were self-defense due to a history of emotional and physical abuse by Michael. Relatives confirmed he was rough and emotionally abusive, frequently humiliating her, although never in their presence. They also noted Danielle became nervous and quick-tempered after years of marriage, but a relative recalled calling her crazy. The prosecution claims Danielle deliberately left her husband to die, indicating she was waiting for him to pass away. They found she used a dating app on the night of the incident, suggesting premeditation driven by hatred and financial gain. Danielle stood to lose a portion of their shared wealth after the divorce. Her net worth was $1.2 million at the time of Michael's death. She had repeatedly changed her statements, possibly to confuse the investigation and tamper with evidence. The defense claimed Michael was a manipulator who preyed on his stepdaughter after his first wife's death. Despite a plea deal offering a 10-year sentence for manslaughter, the defendant insisted on her innocence, risking a life sentence for first- or second-degree murder. The jury delivered a verdict on July 17, 2022, finding Danielle Redlich not guilty of premeditated murder, but guilty of tampering with evidence. She received a 5-year suspended sentence, which was reduced to 2 years due to time served. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Katrina Ashley Edlund Smith. Katrina Ashley Edlund was born on July 16, 1982, to her mother Vicky. She had 2 siblings, an older brother named Chad, and a younger sister named Miranda, who looked up to Katrina as a role model. As children, Miranda would often try on Katrina's clothes and use her makeup, admiring her older sister and wanting to be just like her. As the years passed, Katrina and Miranda formed a strong bond, becoming more like best friends than sisters. Katrina grew up in Musney Park, Illinois, a suburban community outside the city, after her parents separated, and she lived with her mother. Those who knew Katrina described her as a kind, fun-loving person who cherished the holiday season and enjoyed giving humorous gifts to her friends and family. She was deeply involved in her church and had a strong desire to help others, always willing to lend a hand to those in need. Despite her happiness, Katrina longed to find love and thought she had found it when she met Todd Smith at a bar when she was 20 years old. Todd, a self-employed financial planner, had 3 daughters and worked from home. He met Katrina, and despite their differences, they clicked. Todd's flexible schedule allowed them to travel frequently. After 3 years together, Todd proposed to Katrina, and she happily accepted. They planned a small wedding in a local park, and Katrina was thrilled about their future. She loved Todd's daughters and was eager to build a life with him. Katrina's family, including her mother Vicky and siblings Chad and Miranda, adored Todd and thought he was an excellent match for Katrina. They trusted him to take care of her and believed the couple was meant to be. After marrying, Katrina and Todd settled in Masney Park and started their new life together. On October 20th, 2012, Katrina, 30, called her mother and said she was house-sitting for a friend. During their conversation, she mentioned she would visit for dinner on October 24th and had news to share. Vicky suspected that something was amiss, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Before ending their phone call, Vicky promised Katrina that she would cook her favorite meal, chicken and dumplings. Tragically, Vicky would never get the chance to keep that promise. Days later, Katrina vanished, and Vicky would never lay eyes on her again. On October 23rd, at 5 p.m., Todd, Katrina's husband, called 911 to report her disappearance. He told the dispatcher that Katrina was house-sitting for a friend and that he had been trying to reach her for hours without success. When he drove to the house, he found it empty. Katrina's siblings, Miranda and Chad, were alarmed when they heard the news. Chad, who was undergoing military training in Oklahoma, immediately flew to Illinois to help search for his sister. On the evening of the 23rd, a concerned citizen notified the police about an abandoned vehicle near Rock River. The caller reported that the car was not parked on the road, but rather in an easement, suggesting it had been hastily abandoned. When authorities arrived to investigate, they ran the license plate and identified it as belonging to Katrina Smith. Upon inspecting the vehicle, the officer found no signs of a struggle or any trace of Katrina herself. Katrina's mother, Vicky, was adamant that her daughter's disappearance was a clear indication of foul play when she learned that Katrina's car had been abandoned in an unfamiliar area. It was the only logical explanation to Vicky. If Katrina's car was found in that location, someone must have taken her and left the car there. Following the discovery of her car, Katrina's case was officially categorized as a missing person, and the search efforts intensified significantly. On October 12th, at 11 p.m., the police took Todd Smith in for a formal interview at the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department. During the interview, Todd told the detective that he last saw his wife Katrina on October 10th, not October 22nd. He stated that Katrina had come home briefly to do laundry in preparation for a big job interview the following day. According to Todd, while the laundry was in progress, Katrina left to go to the mall to make a purchase and returned home at 8:30 p.m. Todd reported that Katrina briefly returned home before leaving again to make one last stop. She had told him she needed to complete an errand before returning to the house she was watching for a friend. The next day, after Katrina was declared missing, Todd made an emotional appeal to the media, pleading for her safe return. Overcome with emotion, he broke down in tears as he begged for anyone with information about her whereabouts to come forward. As the search for Katrina continued, search teams composed of officers and volunteers worked tirelessly to find her. They focused their efforts on a nearby park, where Katrina's car had been abandoned, hoping to find evidence or clues about her disappearance. When Katrina's brother Chad arrived in Illinois from his army training in Oklahoma, he joined the search for his missing sister at the park. With his military background, Chad took charge of the search party. He created a map, divided the volunteers into teams, and coordinated their efforts to ensure a thorough search. As the search continued, the officers employed a methodical approach, using dogs and walking in straight lines to cover as much ground as possible and detect any potential evidence, no matter how small. Meanwhile, Katrina's mother Vicky focused on spreading awareness about her daughter's disappearance. She posted missing person flyers at gas stations, convenience stores, and lampposts throughout the town, hoping to reach as many people as possible. Despite her overwhelming grief and fear of finding her daughter's body, Vicky was determined to keep searching for Katrina, even if she couldn't participate in the physical search herself. Todd, Katrina's husband, was overcome with emotion during this difficult time. Chad, trying to be supportive, urged Todd to stay strong and focused on finding Katrina. He stood by Todd's side, sympathetic to his brother-in-law's grief. Meanwhile, the police investigation turned up some disturbing clues. An officer found Katrina's purse near her abandoned car, and as he searched further down the road, he discovered more of her belongings, including her cell phone and bloody towels. It was clear that someone had deliberately discarded Katrina's possessions as they drove away from her car. Unfortunately, the police still had no idea where Katrina was, but they feared the worst. The recovered items were sent to the crime lab for analysis, and the police awaited the results with bated breath. As the police searched for clues, they explored every aspect of Katrina's personal life to understand what might have led to her disappearance. They wanted to know if she had any relationships outside her marriage, was involved in gambling or drugs, and what her daily routines were like. To gather this information, they interviewed her friends and family. Everyone they spoke to described Katrina as a kind, responsible person who always put her duties first and avoided anything risky. Her loved ones said she was dedicated to her job and had a strong work ethic. They also reported that she never showed any signs of addiction or irresponsible behavior. The people who knew Katrina described her as a loyal partner and a hard worker who always did the right thing. During the investigation into her disappearance, a woman came forward with an interesting clue. She claimed to have seen a blue car, similar to Katrina's, parked on a bridge over Rock River on the night she vanished. The trunk was open, and someone was kneeling behind it. Although the witness couldn't describe the person's gender or race, her tip led the police to suspect that Katrina might have been a victim of foul play and ended up in the river. However, they still needed concrete evidence to support this theory. The police continued to investigate Katrina's disappearance, looking into potential motives and suspects. Despite seeming to have a happy marriage, her husband Todd was still a person of interest. As the authorities knew that hidden conflicts or secrets can exist in any relationship, their inquiry led them to a teenager in town who had previously shown an unhealthy obsession with Katrina. Earlier in the year, Katrina had confided in friends about the boy's behavior, including allegations of voyeurism, such as spying on her through her bedroom window. This had made Katrina increasingly anxious at the time. Although the boy's activities had stopped when he left for college, the police wondered if he might have returned and resumed stalking Katrina. They devoted significant resources to finding him. 3 days into the search, crucial clues were discovered on Katrina's cell phone, which was being examined at the crime lab. The phone proved to be a crucial source of evidence for the investigators. By examining Katrina's cell phone records, they uncovered a wealth of information, including her text messages, call logs, pictures, videos, and GPS location data. This information enabled the police to reconstruct a more accurate timeline of Katrina's activities. The investigation revealed that Katrina was having an affair with a co-worker, Guy Gabriel. Initially, they had met after work and developed a connection that eventually turned romantic. However, a background check on Guy Gabriel exposed a troubling history of domestic violence. Additionally, the detectives found text messages in which Guy Gabriel demanded that Katrina leave her husband Todd for him. Given Guy Gabriel's violent past and his messages to Katrina, he became the top suspect in her disappearance. The police suspected that Guy Gabriel might have reacted violently towards Katrina because she refused to leave her husband for him. When Katrina's family discovered her affair with Guy, they were shocked and disbelieving. The seemingly perfect couple, Katrina and Todd, had hidden a dark secret. The news of Katrina's infidelity devastated Todd, who was unaware of the affair until the police investigation. Guy Gabriel was questioned by the police at the station, and although he appeared nervous, he admitted to the affair, but denied any involvement in Katrina's disappearance. He claimed to have been at work on the night she went missing. During the investigation, the police uncovered an incident that had occurred 2 weeks before Katrina's disappearance. Witnesses reported that a black Volkswagen Jetta had sped through the parking lot of the auto shop where Katrina and Guy worked, causing a scene during lunchtime. A mysterious driver in a VW Jetta threw a stack of flyers out of the car's sunroof, scattering them among the employees gathered outside. The flyers contained a derogatory remark about Katrina and Guy Gabriel's relationship, but the identity of the driver remained unknown. Meanwhile, the police questioned Katrina's hairstylist, who shared that Katrina had confided in her about feeling unsafe and threatened. Katrina had even considered buying a gun for protection and had become paranoid about being followed. She had gone so far as to take her phone to a store to check for a tracking device, suspecting that someone was monitoring her movements. At the police garage, crime scene investigators searched Katrina's car for clues and used a special chemical called luminol to detect blood. They found a large amount of blood in the trunk. Meanwhile, a firefighter pulled a mysterious object from the water, which turned out to be a severely decomposed female body. The body was difficult to identify due to its condition. At the medical examiner's office, dental experts compared the body's teeth to Katrina Smith's dental records and confirmed that the body belonged to her. The autopsy revealed that Katrina's cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Katrina's family was devastated by the news, and her mother, Vicky, was in disbelief. The police cleared the teenage boy who had been allegedly stalking Katrina as a suspect after verifying his alibi. The police then turned their attention to Guy Gabriel, Katrina's boyfriend outside of her marriage. Guy provided an alibi, claiming he was at work during the time of Katrina's disappearance and murder. His managers and co-workers corroborated his alibi, and the police cleared him as a suspect. Although Guy was no longer a suspect, the police asked for his perspective on who may have hurt Katrina. Guy revealed that Katrina's husband, Todd, exhibited controlling behavior and encouraged Katrina to leave her marriage. The police investigated Katrina's marriage and discovered several concerning details, including Katrina's desire to divorce Todd, her meeting with a divorce attorney, and her separation from Todd. The police suspected Todd of being behind the mysterious flyer incident at Katrina's workplace. Their suspicion grew stronger when they discovered that Todd had test-driven a black Jetta, similar to the car involved in the flyer incident, around the same time it occurred. When the police informed Katrina's family that Todd was the prime suspect in her murder and was already in custody, they were shocked and devastated. Katrina's mother, Vicky, was particularly affected, feeling physically ill at the thought that Todd could be responsible for her daughter's murder. The police also discovered that Todd's financial investment company was facing legal troubles, providing a potential motive for the crime. Katrina was the sole breadwinner for her family since Todd was unemployed. The police suspected that Todd might have motive to kill his wife, as he would gain access to their funds if she left him and their daughters. To gather evidence, the police obtained a search warrant for the couple's home. During the search, they found a baseball bat in the garage with brays of blood on it, which led them to believe it might be the murder weapon. The autopsy revealed that Katrina's injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma, suggesting a bat was used. A DNA test confirmed that the blood on the bat was Katrina's, linking the bat to the crime. The police also found a clean area under the car, which seemed suspicious. Further examination revealed that the bloodstains matched Katrina's DNA profile. 30 days after Katrina's murder, Todd was arrested and charged with her killing, bringing relief to her family. At his trial, the prosecution presented evidence that Katrina had recently visited a divorce attorney, indicating marital problems. On the night of the murder, Katrina had gone to Todd's house to do laundry for a job interview the next morning. The prosecution alleged that Katrina told Todd their marriage was over, triggering his violent reaction. They claimed that Todd grabbed a baseball bat, killed Katrina in the garage, and then disposed of her body by throwing it off a bridge at Rock River. The jury found Todd guilty and sentenced him to 55 years in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Pam Hupp. Pam Hupp was born on October 20th, 1958 in Delwood, Missouri. As the second child of the Newman family, she married Mark Hupp and they had 2 children together. In 2001, the family moved to Fallon, Missouri. Pam had a varied work history, including a job as a life administrator at State Farm until 2010, when she stopped working due to disability claims related to leg and back pain. Despite some past legal issues, including 2 charges of forgery, Pam's acquaintances would never have suspected her of being capable of murder. However, on August 16, 2016, Pam shot and killed Louis Gumpenberger, a mentally challenged man who had been struggling with physical and mental disabilities since a 2005 car accident. Pam claimed that Louis had attacked her with a knife after jumping out of a passing vehicle, and that she had defended herself by slapping the knife away and then shooting him 5 times with her Ruger LCR, which she retrieved from her nightstand. However, this account of events seems suspicious, and it is uncertain what really happened that day. Pam accused Louis of instructing her to drive him to the bank to withdraw money belonging to Russ Farrier, a man wrongly convicted of murdering his wife Betsy in 2011. According to Pam, Louis became agitated and excited, saying, "We're going to the bank. We're getting Russ's money." However, evidence later revealed that Louis's true intention was to have Louis Gumpenberger attack and kill Pam. A handwritten note found at the crime scene contained instructions for Gumpenberger. First, he was to obtain Russ's money from Pam's apartment. Next, he was to kill Pam and make it look like Russ's wife was responsible. The note included gruesome details, such as ensuring the knife was left sticking out of Pam's neck. The perpetrator was willing to pay Gumpenberger a large sum of money for carrying out this heinous act. Pam Hupp was arrested for the murder of Lou Gumpenberger. However, a question arose. Was Gumpenberger a hired assassin, or did Pam manipulate him, using a mentally disabled man as a scapegoat? The truth began to unravel when Pam went to the O'Fallon Police Department voluntarily. During her interview, Pam asked if it would be recorded, mentioning that she normally appeared with Chris Hayes, a KTVI news reporter. She even blamed Hayes for attracting criminals through his reporting. Pam had a history of pretending to be Kathy, a producer of an NBC TV show. According to the O'Fallon police chief and the St. Charles County prosecutor, Pam used this persona to lure Gumpenberger into her home, where she tricked him into recreating a 911 call, providing a cover for the brutal crime she was about to commit. After killing Gumpenberger, Pam Hupp planted evidence to incriminate herself, including writing a note found on his body. The police had a strong case against her due to the overwhelming evidence they uncovered. They found $9 bills on Gumpenberger's body, which Pam had placed there. The 10th 9 bill was later discovered in her dresser, and its serial number matched 3 of the $100 bills, also found on Gumpenberger. Pam Hupp was arrested on August 23, 2016, and charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. When she requested to use the restroom on the day of her arrest, she attempted to commit suicide by stabbing her wrist and neck with a ballpoint pen. Fortunately, she did not succeed. On January 30, 2017, Pam appeared in court for the first time. The prosecutor, Phil Groyne, argued that her actions demonstrated a consciousness of guilt. A grand jury convicted her of all charges. In December 2016, her bail was set at $2 million. Pam's trial began in 2017, during which she pleaded not guilty, prompting the prosecutor to pursue the death penalty. The prosecutor's reasoning was that Pam had seemingly chosen her victim, Gumpenberger, at random. In June 2019, Pam entered an Alford plea, which allowed her to plead guilty while maintaining her innocence. This move nullified the death penalty charge and led to a jury trial being cancelled. As a result, Pam was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole in August 2019. Following her sentencing, she called her then-husband Matt Hupp, and explained that she had confessed to killing Louis Gumpenberger to avoid putting their family through a lengthy and distressing trial. During the trial, disturbing facts about Pam's past came to light, shocking the police, judges, and the public. In June 2016, Judge Cunningham ruled that evidence related to the brutal murder of Betsy Faria could be presented in court. This ruling led to the reopening of the Betsy Faria case. Betsy, born Elizabeth Faria, worked with Pam at State Farm as a life insurance administrator and lived in Troy, Missouri, with her husband Russ Faria and 2 daughters from a previous relationship. Betsy was diagnosed with cancer in 2010. In October 2011, she discovered that the cancer had spread to her liver and she only had a few months left to live. Sadly, she passed away on December 22, 2011. Before her death, Betsy changed the beneficiary of her $150,000 life insurance policy from her husband to Pam Huff, without informing her husband or daughters. Pam claimed that Betsy had instructed her to set up a trust fund for her daughters, but later alleged that Betsy wanted her to keep the money because they had a romantic relationship. Betsy's daughters took Pam to court in 2014, trying to reclaim their mother's life insurance fund. However, their case was dismissed in 2016. In the same year, Russ, Betsy's husband, sued State Farm. On December 27, 2011, just 5 days after making Pam the beneficiary of her life insurance policy, Betsy attended a chemotherapy session at the Alvin J. Sitman Cancer Center. Weakened from the treatment, she went to her mother's house, where it was agreed that Russ would pick her up, or she would stay overnight. However, Pam unexpectedly showed up and insisted on driving Betsy home, claiming to have dropped her off around 7 p.m. Betsy's daughter reported that her mother didn't answer her call at around 7:21 p.m. Later, at 9:40 p.m., Russ, Betsy's husband, desperately called 911 to report that his wife had taken her own life. However, Russ had been at his friend Michael Corbin's house, watching movies from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Afterward, he drove to Arby's Lake in St. Louis before returning home. When the emergency responders arrived about 10 minutes after Russ's call, they quickly realized that Betsy's death was not a suicide. Her body was found lying on her right side, with 55 stab wounds and a deep cut on her wrist. A kitchen knife was lodged in her neck, and another knife was discovered under her pillow. Notably, there were no bloodstains or footprints around the entrance of the house. The investigation determined that Betsy died between 7:20 p.m. and 9:41 p.m. Suspicion immediately fell on Russ Faria, who became the prime suspect. The authorities believed he had a motive, as his wife had refused to give him access to $150,000. Russ was arrested and charged with his wife's murder, while the real killer remained at large. Russ Faria was arrested the day after Betsy's death. He became the prime suspect due to his 911 call, in which he claimed her death was a suicide. However, a glance at the body immediately ruled out this possibility. Additionally, a pair of blood-stained slippers were discovered in his closet, incriminating evidence against him. Russ was subsequently charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action in court in January 2012, just a day after his wife's funeral. The investigation revealed more damning evidence against Russ. He performed poorly on a polygraph test, leading police to regard his behavior as suspicious and erratic. Furthermore, at Pam's request, the police searched Betsy's laptop and found a disturbing Word document in which she expressed her fear of losing her life at the hands of her husband. Russ was held on a $250,000 bail, which he couldn't afford, so he was kept in county jail until his trial on November 18, 2013. During police questioning, Pam revealed that Russ had a history of violence, heavy drinking, and had previously threatened Betsy, making it easy to suspect him of the murder. The prosecution argued that Russ had a strong motive to kill his wife. She had received a large sum of $150,000 for her friend, bypassing him in the process. According to Judge Christina Menem, this motive was enough to implicate Russ. At the trial, Russ's lawyer, Joel Schwartz, defended his client's innocence. Schwartz claimed that Russ had spent most of the night with friends who corroborated his alibi. Additionally, Russ had purchased food at a store that evening, which made it physically impossible for him to stab his wife 55 times within the given time frame. Furthermore, there were no bloodstains on his clothes or body. The prosecutor countered that Russ's friends might have been involved in the crime and had lied about his whereabouts that night. The prosecutor suggested that Russ's friends had accompanied him to buy food at ABY and stage an alibi. The presiding judge, Christina Menem, refused to allow Joel Schwartz to present crucial evidence that implicated Pam as an alternative suspect. This evidence included phone records showing Pam was still near Betsy's apartment 30 minutes after she claimed to have left, as well as the fact that Betsy had made Parry of a $150,000 life insurance policy just 5 days before her death. Despite Pam having a clear motive, the judge chose to ignore it. In a closed hearing, Pam claimed to have put $100,000 of the insurance money into a trust fund for Betsy's daughters. However, in a later civil deposition, she admitted to keeping the money for herself, stating that she didn't want her daughters, mother, or sisters to have it. Meanwhile, Detective Mike Merkel of the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office reported that a crime scene camera had malfunctioned, resulting in important photographs being unable to be developed. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Russ was convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action in November 2013. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for 30 years. Before Ferrier's second trial, Attorney Schwartz finally obtained the photos that showed no blood trail. To this day, I've tried to identify who in the prosecutor's office sent me those photos, but I've been unsuccessful. Fox 2 News was present in the courtroom when Schwartz dramatically revealed that he had uncovered evidence that police and prosecutors had been hiding. After this, Russ was transferred to the Jefferson City Correctional Center, a welcome development for Pam's sister Betsy. During the trial, Russ's wife testified that he had once pressed a pillow against her face, whispering, "This is what it feels like to die," because she had removed him from her insurance policy. Schwartz pointed out that this story originally came from Pam, but the judge ignored this. Throughout the trial, Russ's friends were falsely accused of being accessories to murder, thanks to the prosecutor's closing speech. Fortunately, no charges were brought against them, even though Russ spent nearly 4 years in prison. In February 2015, attorney Joel Schwartz appealed Russ's conviction. However, back in 2013, Judge Christina Menem had already rejected Schwartz's request to review the case. In 2014, KTVI and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch revisited the case, uncovering some suspicious facts about Betsy's death and her true killer. Their investigation found that Pam Hupp had given contradictory statements to the police, including a false claim that she had left the Farrier residence immediately after dropping Betsy off. The Farrier murder case was marred by controversy and deceit. A police officer recalled being shocked that nobody suspected Pam, with everyone focusing on Russ instead. A 911 operator testified that Russ seemed genuinely shocked and agitated during their call. However, 2 jurors revealed that crucial information had been withheld from them, raising questions about why the sheriff's department would deliberately hide evidence that favored Russ. The media uncovered a disturbing web of relationships between the prosecuting attorney, ASI, and key figures in the case, including the captain of investigations and a lead investigator. This information led to Russ's retrial in February 2015. The Missouri Court of Appeal transferred the case back to the 45th Circuit Court, where a new judge, Stephen R., took over. He granted a new bench trial due to new evidence and released Russ on bond pending the trial. During the retrial, Russ was allowed to present incriminating evidence against Pam. Some police officers admitted that Pam had told them she saw Russ with another man in a car while she was dropping off Betsy. The CSI agent who handled the crime scene believed that Russ's blood-stained slippers were a setup, and that the blood stain was not from stepping in blood. Russ was acquitted of all charges and released on November 7, 2015. He later filed a lawsuit against ASI and 3 deputy sheriffs for ignoring exonerating evidence and fabricating evidence. In 2020, he was awarded a $2 million settlement. The case also led to repercussions for the officials involved. ASI faced a bar complaint, although it was rejected. She later announced that she was willing to cooperate with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Lincoln County Commissioner to review her conduct. Judge Christina Menem was suspended for misconduct in a different case and was voted out of office in 2018 for her role in the Farrier murder case. In 2019, Lincoln County appointed a new attorney, Mike Wood, who reopened the Betsy Farrier murder case. He confessed that the wrongful conviction of Russ had inspired him to take the job. Pam was eventually interrogated as a suspect in the murder and was charged with first-degree murder. The new prosecutor, Wood, sought the death penalty due to the heinousness of the crime. Betsy Farrier was brutally murdered, stabbed 55 times, and her wrist was almost completely severed. Detective Mike Wood condemned the act as animalistic and charged Pam Hupp with the crime. Wood had strong evidence against Pam, including a $150,000 life insurance policy that named her as the beneficiary just days before Betsy's death. Pam had promised to put the money in a trust fund for Betsy's daughter, but instead kept it for herself, claiming that Betsy had wanted her to have it. In an interview, Pam claimed that she and Betsy were lovers, but Wood believed she was lying. Pam had also loaned her son $120,000 from her company in 2021, contradicting her earlier claims. Wood was convinced that Pam murdered Betsy by stabbing her with a kitchen knife while she slept on the sofa. He believed Pam tried to make it look like a domestic violence incident by walking around the room with socks on. The evidence against Pam included a text message she sent to Betsy's phone at 7:20 p.m. claiming she was home, but her call records showed she was still at the Farrier residence. The fact that Betsy was found lying on her side suggested to Wood that she was killed by someone she trusted. Pam pleaded not guilty of the crime, but her trial was delayed multiple times due to her attorney's death and other issues. Finally, in 2023, the trial was scheduled to start in 2025. Wood was not only determined to bring Pam to justice, but also criticized the Lincoln County prosecutors for mismanaging the case and showing bias against Russ Farrier, Betsy's husband. He pointed out a 2015 destruction order that could have led to the destruction of evidence, which would have made it impossible for Russ to be released from prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Mary Catherine Higdon. Mary Catherine Higdon was born in 1994. Mary was a lively and cheerful child who loved making people laugh with her humor, impressions, and playful antics. She had a special bond with her pet frog, which she'd often take on walks around town. Mary was an outdoorsy person who enjoyed exploring nature and appreciating its beauty. She was also passionate about performing, often putting on shows for her family that showcased her creativity and imagination. Her family saw great potential in her and thought she had a bright future ahead. As she grew older, Mary developed a strong interest in firearms. She learned to handle guns responsibly and appreciated their power. She became a skilled marksman and continued to develop her skills. During her high school years, Mary met her partner, Stephen Freeman, who would become the love of her life. Stephen was born on January 1, 1995, in Griffin, Georgia, where he grew up with his parents and brother. He had a happy childhood, surrounded by a loving family and many friends who described him as laid-back, kind, and helpful. Stephen enjoyed spending time outdoors and exploring nature. Stephen was particularly close to his parents, but he shared a special bond with his mother. When she graduated from college after returning to school, Stephen wrote her a heartfelt letter expressing his admiration for her achievement. In the letter, he praised her hard work and determination, saying he looked up to her every day and loved her more than words could say. Stephen had immense respect and appreciation for his mother, which was clear in the way he spoke about her. After meeting in high school, Stephen and Mary Catherine formed a strong bond, united by their passion for outdoor activities like hiking, camping, fishing, and hunting. Their shared love of nature became the foundation of their robust relationship. After graduating from high school, the couple decided to take the next step by moving in together in Griffin, Georgia. Living together in their own space thrilled Mary Catherine and Stephen. What's more, Stephen's mother welcomed Mary Catherine into their family, treating her like a daughter. Every Sunday, the couple would visit Stephen's parents for a big family dinner, a tradition that brought them all closer together and solidified Mary Catherine's place within the family. Stephen's friends were initially hesitant about his relationship with Mary Catherine, but as they got to know her better, they began to appreciate her positive influence on Stephen's life. They saw how happy and joyful she made him, and they admired her enthusiasm for the outdoors. Stephen and Mary Catherine had different occupations. Stephen worked as a metal worker, specializing in roof repairs. Mary Catherine, on the other hand, had two part-time jobs. She worked as a teacher's assistant at St. George's Episcopal School, a preschool in Milner, Georgia. Additionally, she was employed at a sporting goods store where she sold guns. Interestingly, one of Stephen's close friends, Thomas Skinner, was also a colleague of Mary Catherine's at the sporting goods shop. Mary Catherine learned about basic gun safety while working at a sporting goods store, which taught her how to properly hold, load, and shoot a gun. Similarly, Stephen was enthusiastic about firearms and owned several shotguns and rifles that he used for hunting and target practice. He also kept a Glock 42 handgun at home for self-protection. After 5 years together, Mary Catherine and Stephen were still living in their apartment in Griffin, Georgia, by the summer of 2018. However, their relationship took a tragic turn on August 1st when Mary Catherine made a distressing 911 call, marking the end of their high school romance. Mary Catherine frantically called the dispatcher, screaming that she had accidentally just shot her boyfriend. The police quickly responded to the emergency call and arrived at the apartment shared by Mary Catherine and Stephen. They found Mary Catherine in a state of panic, crying and hyperventilating as she knelt beside Stephen's motionless body. She repeatedly wailed that she could not lose him, her voice filled with anguish and desperation. As the police carefully moved Mary Catherine away from Stephen, they were able to assess his condition. They discovered that he had been shot in the chest, but miraculously, he was still alive. The police immediately called for an ambulance to rush Stephen to the nearest hospital. At the emergency room, a team of skilled doctors worked to save Stephen's life. Despite their best efforts, his condition continued to worsen. Unfortunately, the severity of his injury ultimately proved fatal, and Stephen succumbed to his wounds. After Stephen was taken to the hospital, Mary Catherine accompanied the police to the station for a formal interview. Mary Catherine explained what happened on the night she accidentally shot Stephen. She said she was giving him the gun because he normally kept it beside his bed for safety. However, she clarified that they never loaded the chamber of their guns at home. During the police questioning, officers detected the smell of alcohol on Mary Catherine's breath. As they pressed her for more information, her story changed. Initially, she said she handed Stephen the gun, but later claimed she tossed it to him. The police were skeptical of her changing story, knowing that a gun wouldn't fire randomly just because it was tossed. Someone had to pull the trigger. The police investigation revealed that Mary Catherine must have been pointing the gun directly at Stephen's body for the bullet to have struck where it did, given the location of his gunshot wound. During her interview, Mary Catherine admitted, "I did it out of anger. But unfortunately, the recording equipment malfunctioned at that exact moment, and her words were inaudible. Despite the missing recording, the police still had strong evidence pointing to Mary Catherine's intention to harm Stephen. At the couple's apartment, they found signs of an intense argument, including scattered food throughout the house. Additionally, police records showed that officers had responded to 5 domestic disturbance calls at the couple's residence in the past year. The police also discovered that the gun used in the shooting was loaded on the night of the incident, contradicting Mary Catherine's claims. These findings collectively led the police to conclude that Mary Catherine had intentionally shot her boyfriend Stephen. The police found cooking grease residue on the gun and magazine, leading them to believe Mary Catherine, who was cooking dinner at the time, had loaded the weapon. After Mary Catherine shot Stephen, the police questioned his friends to learn more about their relationship. According to his friends, Mary Catherine and Stephen's relationship was marked by constant fighting and toxicity. They reported that the couple frequently had intense, heated arguments. Mary Catherine was described as possessive and verbally abusive towards Stephen, with signs of mental instability that heightened the tension between them. Whenever Stephen tried to create distance by leaving their apartment, Mary Catherine would barrage him with relentless texts and calls, forcing him to block her. One of Stephen's friends revealed that Stephen had confided in him about Mary Catherine's history of threatening him with a gun. Specifically, she had pulled a firearm on him at least 3 times in the past. Despite this, Stephen chose not to report these incidents to the authorities because he was worried about Mary Catherine getting into trouble. Stephen's friends stressed that his top priority was always Mary Catherine's well-being, even when it put his own safety at risk. When Stephen's friends learned that Mary Catherine had accidentally shot him, they were skeptical because they knew she was knowledgeable about handling firearms. In fact, just 3 months prior to the shooting, Stephen had texted a friend to say that Mary Catherine was running wild outside, screaming and attempting to shoot both him and herself. Stephen told a friend that Mary Catherine had previously pointed a gun at him, but the latest time, her eyes frightened him, making him think she might actually pull the trigger. By July 2018, Stephen was exhausted with Mary Catherine's behavior and considered leaving her. In July, Stephen planned to secretly move to another town while Mary Catherine was out, without telling her. He was afraid of how she might react if she knew he was leaving. Just 2 days before Mary Catherine fatally shot Stephen, the police found a series of revealing text messages from July 30th. The conversation started with Stephen sending Mary Catherine a friendly message. "Good morning, beautiful. Don't forget." Mary Catherine responded with, "Have a great day." Stephen replied, "You too. Love you." However, the night of July 31st, Stephen avoided Mary Catherine's texts and calls, as they were in the middle of a fight, and instead spent the evening at a friend's house. On the night of August 1st, Mary Catherine was at home preparing dinner when she realized Stephen wasn't there. She contacted Stephen's mother, who told her that he was with his friend. Angry and feeling betrayed, Mary Catherine drove to his friend's house, determined to confront Stephen. When she arrived, she saw Stephen sitting in the passenger seat of his friend's truck. Mary Catherine pulled up alongside and began yelling at Stephen, who tried to calm her down, promising to come home soon. Although Stephen's friends claimed that Mary Catherine had pointed a gun at Stephen on multiple occasions, Mary Catherine vigorously denied these allegations. She maintained that she never pulled a gun on Stephen. However, Mary Catherine did admit to having threatened to take her own life with a gun on several occasions. In a later interview, Stephen's mother shared her insight, believing that one of the main reasons Stephen stayed with Mary Catherine for so long was because she frequently threatened to harm herself. Stephen was afraid that Mary Catherine would follow through on her threats if he decided to leave her. However, on the night of the incident that led to Stephen's shooting, Mary Catherine claimed that Stephen was the one who became aggressive and violent. According to her, Stephen threw the dinner she had prepared in her face. Mary Catherine stated that she only picked up the gun to defend herself and scare Stephen away. She wanted him to leave the apartment, but Stephen allegedly lunged at her, which frightened her. As she backed away, the next thing she knew, Stephen was bleeding from the chest. At the time of the shooting, Mary Catherine didn't tell the police her version of events because she was embarrassed to admit that Stephen had a history of violence towards her. She claimed that Stephen had hit her in the past and was controlling. She even recalled an incident where Stephen kicked her out of bed with such force that she hit her head on the door frame. However, Stephen's friends had a different perspective on their relationship. They claimed to have witnessed Mary Catherine being physically aggressive towards Stephen, stating that she had slapped him hard in the face. Mary Catherine's sister contradicted her account of their relationship, revealing that she had seen bruises on Mary Catherine's arm 2 weeks before Stephen was killed. When questioned, Mary Catherine confided in her sister that Stephen had grabbed her, causing the injuries. After investigating Stephen's death as a murder, the authorities charged Mary Catherine with murder, aggravated assault, and firearm possession during a felony. The prosecution offered her a plea deal, proposing a life sentence with possible parole if she pleaded guilty. However, Mary Catherine declined the offer, opting to stand trial and assert her innocence. At the trial, Mary Catherine maintained that she shot Stephen in self-defense, denying the charges against her. The trial, which began on June 17, 2019, nearly a year after Stephen's death, exposed the tumultuous relationship between Mary Catherine and Stephen. Mary Catherine's lawyers argued that she acted out of genuine fear, citing Stephen's history of violence and abuse. Mary Catherine testified that she was the victim of Stephen's controlling, manipulative, and dangerous behavior, which included physical, mental, emotional, verbal, and sexual abuse. She described being hit, humiliated, and degraded by Stephen on multiple occasions, and shared specific incidents where he smacked her around and verbally abused her. Mary Catherine explained that Stephen's constant threats and abuse left her feeling trapped, fearful for her life, and constantly walking on eggshells to avoid triggering his anger. She presented evidence in the form of text messages, including one where Stephen threatened to punish her, which she said meant he would physically harm her. Another text message showed Stephen's explicit threat to hit her back twice as hard if she defended herself. Mary Catherine's defense team also presented messages that supported her allegations of sexual assault, including a text where Stephen mentioned his red room, which she described as a place where they engaged in violent and aggressive intercourse. Mary Catherine testified that Stephen sexually assaulted her on 2 occasions, including one after they returned from a vacation to Walt Disney World, where he allegedly ignored her pleas to stop and intensified his efforts instead. The defense presented over 60 pages of text messages from Stephen, which showcased his pattern of verbal assaults and threatening behavior towards Mary Catherine. These messages included disturbing images and captions, such as one showing Stephen holding a dead fish, accompanied by the caption, "This is you." Another message showed Stephen's violent threats towards Mary Catherine after she cheated on him, where he wrote, "I'm going to wreck you for wrecking me." The defense also alleged that Stephen's drug and alcohol addiction contributed to his violent outbursts. Mary Catherine maintained that she was the one who ended the relationship, not Stephen, and that her actions on the night she shot him were a result of her desperation to escape the abuse. Mary Catherine claimed that Stephen had reacted violently to some news and had threatened to attack her, causing her to defend herself by grabbing a gun. She said the last thing she had told him before shooting was to get out of her house. However, Stephen's friends and family disputed Mary Catherine's allegations, describing Stephen as a friendly and caring person. Stephen's mother said she was unaware of any threatening messages her son had sent Mary Catherine and did not condone such behavior. Although she acknowledged that Stephen may have said some angry things, she believed he did not mean them. In court, the prosecution questioned Mary Catherine about her story, pointing out that she had never reported any alleged abuse by Stephen. They also presented evidence that Mary Catherine had searched for violent and explicit content online just hours before the shooting, which she claimed was to find ways to make Stephen happy. The prosecution argued that Mary Catherine had changed her story about the shooting multiple times, and that a text from Stephen suggested she had pointed a gun at him before. Additionally, Stephen's friends testified that they had witnessed Mary Catherine's violent behavior towards him. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Mary Catherine not guilty of murder, assault, and other charges. The verdict surprised Stephen's loved ones, who felt that justice had not been served. Later, the jurors revealed that they believed Mary Catherine had intentionally killed Stephen, but there was not enough evidence to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. This lack of evidence made it difficult to determine whether the shooting was murder or self-defense. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ryan Poston. Ryan Poston was born on December 30th, 1982 in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, and grew up with 3 loving sisters. His parents provided him with an adventurous upbringing, allowing him to attend schools in Switzerland and the Philippines. Ryan's good looks, charming features, and charismatic personality made him a standout among his peers. After completing high school, he attended Indiana University, where he excelled in his studies, graduating with honors in 2005 with a triple major in political science, history, and geography. Following in his family's footsteps, Ryan pursued a career in law and enrolled in Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University. His ultimate goal was to run a successful law firm, providing fair and competent legal representation to those who couldn't afford high-priced attorneys. After a painful breakup in 2011, Ryan turned to his cousin, Carissa, for support. During this time, he regularly visited her in Lexington, Kentucky, where he met Shayna Hubers, a native of the city. Shayna was a charming and lively individual with a warm personality that drew people to her. Despite their 8-year age difference, their mutual attraction grew stronger with each visit Ryan made to Lexington. As they spent more time together, their connection deepened. Shayna began to spend more weekends in Highland Heights, where Ryan lived, taking care of him and cooking for him. However, their promising future came to a devastating end on October 12, 2012. In a distressing 911 call, Shayna revealed that she had just killed her boyfriend Ryan. She described a harrowing scene of domestic violence that had escalated out of control, claiming that Ryan had attempted to physically abuse her and confronted her with a gun. According to Shayna, she panicked and pulled the trigger, shooting Ryan, and then shot him several more times, believing she was putting him out of his misery. Within minutes of Shayna's call, officers arrived at the scene, responding to the shocking tragedy. When police officers arrived, they told Shayna to come out of the apartment with her hands up. At first, she was hesitant, but she eventually complied. As she walked out, the officers told her to lie down on the ground. Shayna was clearly upset as she followed their instructions. After handcuffing her and putting her in the patrol car, the officers went into the apartment and found Ryan Poston's body on the dining room floor, covered in blood. The crime scene investigators found that the apartment was slightly messy, but nothing out of the ordinary for a 29-year-old man. The investigators learned that Ryan had a concealed carry permit and owned guns, including the Sig Sauer semi-automatic that Shayna used to shoot him. From the evidence, they determined that Ryan was sitting at the table when Shayna shot him. They knew this because of the blood on the table. However, the fact that many items on the table were undisturbed raised doubts about Shayna's story. If there had been a fight, the items would have been disturbed. The investigators searched the apartment thoroughly, while other officers canvassed the neighborhood, looking for additional information. One neighbor, Nikki, provided valuable information to the detective. Nikki knew Shayna well and believed that Ryan didn't return Shayna's dedication to him. According to Nikki, they frequently argued, often disturbing the peace. Months earlier, Nikki recalled an incident where Shayna came to her door in tears, saying she was afraid of Ryan. Shayna claimed that Ryan had picked her up and thrown her down the hallway, injuring her. Nikki encouraged Shayna to report the abuse to the police, but Shayna chose not to. At the police station, detectives took Shayna to an interrogation room to question her about shooting Ryan. Before questioning her, they read her Miranda rights, informing her of her right to an attorney. Shayna exercised this right and requested an attorney. However, she chose to talk to the detectives despite this. When asked about the victim, Shayna replied, "The man I killed," which showed a sense of detachment. She claimed she acted in self-defense, saying Ryan had grabbed her by the throat and thrown her around the apartment. Shayna described the night as surreal and out of body. Later in the interview, she added that Ryan had said mean things to her, taunting her while holding a gun, and that he was under the influence of drugs. Shayna maintained that she shot Ryan because she believed he was going to kick her out of his condo. She said she picked up the gun and shot him once, and then shot him several more times after seeing him twitch. During her confession, Shayna revealed that Ryan was vain and wanted a nose job, so she shot him in the face to grant his wish. During the intense questioning, Shayna revealed her worries about her schoolwork and how having a dead boyfriend would affect her future relationships. She was specifically concerned that no one would want to marry her once they found out she had killed her boyfriend in self-defense. The detective listened to her statement, but ultimately arrested her and charged her with Ryan's murder. Shayna appeared genuinely surprised by her arrest, claiming she had acted in self-defense when she shot him. In 2015, Shayna's trial began, filling the courtroom with anticipation. The prosecutor started by comparing Shayna to Jodi Arias, who had also been accused of murdering her boyfriend, Travis Alexander. The similarities between the two cases added to the tension in the courtroom as everyone waited for the verdict. The prosecutor believed that Shayna was obsessed with her ex-boyfriend Ryan, and that he was all she could think about. Ryan's friends testified that he wanted to end their relationship and was avoiding Shayna's calls and messages. Despite this, Shayna would often show up uninvited at Ryan's condo in Highland Heights. On the night Ryan was murdered, the prosecution presented evidence that he had a date planned with Audrey Bolt, a former beauty queen. The prosecution suggested that Shayna was motivated by jealousy and anger towards Ryan's new love interest. Audrey Bolt testified that Ryan stood her up on the night of the murder. She had no idea he had been shot and killed until later. The prosecution presented evidence that Ryan had told his father he wanted to break up with Shayna, and his father advised him to be kind to her to avoid a messy breakup. However, Ryan and Shayna exchanged texts on the day of the murder, with Ryan telling her he didn't want to see her. Despite this, Shayna showed up at his condo uninvited. The prosecution believed that during an argument, Ryan told Shayna he was done with her and that she could no longer control him. This allegedly enraged Shayna, who then picked up a gun and shot Ryan. The prosecution played a video of Shayna's police interrogation, which they claimed showed her to be a cold-blooded murderer. In the video, Shayna appears carefree and unemotional, which the prosecution argued was inconsistent with someone who had just killed in self-defense. However, this interpretation was open to interpretation by the jury. The defense argued that Ryan was acting erratically and violently on the night of the murder due to drugs he was taking, including anti-anxiety medication and amphetamines. The autopsy results showed that these drugs were present in Ryan's system. The defense claimed that Shayna shot Ryan in self-defense. The evidence suggested that the substances he was using influenced his actions. To support this idea, Shayna's lawyers called an expert in toxicology to testify on her behalf. The expert stated that a combination of anti-anxiety medications and amphetamines could cause someone to become violent and paranoid. The defense presented this expert testimony to create a reasonable explanation for Shayna's actions, questioning whether she had intentionally meant to harm anyone. During Shayna's trial in April 2015, the prosecution became worried that the jury might be swayed by Shayna's self-defense claim, particularly because she was smart, young, and attractive. These fears were alleviated on April 23 when the jury delivered a guilty verdict, convicting Shayna of murdering her boyfriend, Ryan Poston. However, at the sentencing hearing in August 2015, Shayna continued to blame Ryan for his own death, which outraged his friends and family. Shayna claimed she was innocent throughout the trial and refused to take responsibility for her actions, despite the evidence against her. In Kentucky, defendants who are victims of domestic violence may be eligible for reduced parole after serving just 20% of their sentence. However, the judge didn't believe Shayna qualified for this reduced parole, citing that her crime was a premeditated murder. As a result, Shayna was sentenced to 40 years in prison, making her eligible for parole in 17 years, at the age of 41 in 2032. After her sentencing, Shayna appealed for a new trial, which was granted in August 2016. The reason for the appeal was that one of the jurors had a felony conviction, which they had concealed. This violated Kentucky law, as felons are not allowed to serve on juries. In August 2018, Shayna's second trial for Ryan Poston's murder began, 4 months later than expected. Her defense attorney presented opening arguments, stating that during her year-and-a-half relationship with Ryan, Shayna tried her best to make him happy. However, their relationship suffered as a result. The defense attorney claimed that on the night Shayna met Ryan, he was violent toward her, both physically and sexually. This incident had a lasting impact on Shayna, causing her to take several weeks to respond to his messages afterwards. Additionally, the defense team argued that Shayna had a history of trauma, stemming from a sexual assault she experienced in high school. This led to her struggles with alcohol abuse and promiscuity. They claimed that this traumatic experience contributed to her behavior on the night of Ryan's murder. The defense team's strategy was to present a sympathetic portrayal of Shayna, highlighting her troubled past and arguing that she was not responsible for her actions on the night of the murder. They aimed to challenge the prosecution's narrative and convince the jury that her behavior was driven by a combination of factors, including a history of abuse and a toxic relationship with Ryan. Shayna's defense team claimed that she was a victim of domestic violence by Ryan, rather than a cold-blooded killer. They argued that her actions were a result of years of abuse, not driven by revenge or financial gain. The defense pointed out that Ryan constantly belittled Shayna about her weight and breast size, making her feel insecure and inadequate. This, they said, contributed to her low self-esteem. The defense also stated that Shayna and Ryan's sexual relationship was troubled, marked by frequent arguments and frustration on both sides. They claimed that Ryan's desire for a more intimate connection was unfulfilled, leading to a growing rift between them. The defense presented evidence that Shayna had received a treatment to improve her romantic life. They claimed that she got this treatment to address sexual problems in their relationship and strengthen their bond. The defense argued that Ryan's consistent lack of interest and rejection made things worse, causing Shayna to become more and more frustrated and disconnected from him. The defense claimed that Ryan often broke up with Shayna, only to pursue relationships with other women. However, the prosecution clarified that they were not trying to portray Ryan as a perfect partner, but rather as someone who was not abusive. The prosecution argued that Shayna did not kill Ryan in self-defense, but rather because he had finally ended their toxic relationship on the night of the shooting. They believed Ryan had every reason to break up with Shayna, as she continued to harass him even after their previous breakups. Despite Ryan's efforts to end the relationship, Shayna consistently returned. The prosecution saw this as evidence of Shayna's inability to let go of the relationship. A friend of Ryan's testified that this breakup was different, as Ryan had never had the courage to end things with Shayna in person before, implying that this time, the breakup would be permanent. Ryan accused Shayna of trying to hold on to him. To support this claim, the prosecution presented texts where Shayna told her friends that the romantic interactions with Ryan had brought them closer. However, Shayna testified in her own defense, contradicting Ryan's claim. She said that their romantic interactions had actually driven them apart. In a separate text exchange, Shayna asked Ryan for sex, but he declined due to the side effects of his antidepressant medication, which had reduced his libido. Despite these conflicting accounts, Shayna testified that Ryan had forcibly had sex with her. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury again found Shayna guilty of murdering Ryan, despite the contradictory testimonies and evidence. The jury confirmed their original verdict, and during the sentencing hearing, Shayna's mother emotionally addressed the judge, sharing stories of her daughter's remarkable singing talent, which had earned her multiple college scholarships. Through tears, she asked the jury to consider granting Shayna parole, emphasizing that her daughter still had the potential to positively impact others' lives. Shayna's mother made it clear that her plea did not diminish the profound grief and pain experienced by the family of Ryan Poston. Despite her mother's emotional appeal, Shayna was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. According to the sentence, Shayna must serve at least 17 years before becoming eligible for parole in 2032. She is currently serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institute for Women in Pewee Valley, Kentucky. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elizabeth Smart. On June 5, 2002, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was sleeping in her bedroom in Federal Heights, Salt Lake City, Utah. She shared the room with her sister Mary Catherine, but their peaceful night was about to take a terrifying turn. A soft-spoken man, armed with a knife, climbed through their open window. This woke Mary Catherine, who pretended to be asleep, hoping to protect her sister. The man ordered Elizabeth to be quiet, threatening to harm her if she didn't comply. Terrified, Elizabeth put on her shoes and was taken outside. Mary Catherine waited 2 hours before waking their parents, Ed and Lois Smart. She told them someone had taken Elizabeth, but they didn't believe her at first, thinking she might be dreaming. However, after inspecting the bedroom and finding a cut window screen, they realized Mary Catherine was telling the truth. They immediately contacted the authorities, who arrived and questioned Mary Catherine about the kidnapper. Mary Catherine described the man as having dark hair on his head, arms, and hands. Although he spoke quietly, she recognized his voice as familiar, but couldn't remember where she had heard it before. The police used the Rachel alert system to broadcast information about Elizabeth's abduction to the public, seeking their help in finding her. As part of their investigation, the police looked into people who had toured the Smart family's home, which was for sale at the time. They also searched the family's computer to see if Elizabeth had interacted with anyone suspicious online. The day after the kidnapping, Ed and Lois Smart made a heartfelt appeal on national television, pleading for their daughter's safe return. The police searched all night for the suspicious individual, but couldn't find them, so they ruled out the tip as not credible. Another tip came from a milkman who claimed to have seen a man driving a gray Honda or Nissan on Elizabeth Street around the time of her disappearance. He wrote down the license plate number, but when the police checked, they couldn't find any information on it, so they dismissed the tip. The police investigation was complicated by the many people who showed up at the Smart residence soon after Elizabeth's abduction, which could have contaminated any potential evidence. They questioned a man who had contact with Elizabeth before her abduction, but he was released after they determined he wasn't involved. The search for Elizabeth continued, with over 20 volunteer pilots searching the Salt Lake area from the air, but they found nothing. Tracking dogs indicated they had smelled something in Red Butte Canyon, but the police search of that area yielded nothing. Elizabeth's father, Ed, was exhausted from the search and was hospitalized briefly, but he was determined to keep looking for his daughter. He and his wife, Lois, were barely holding on. But they believed Elizabeth was alive and would come home to them. Ed took a polygraph test to aid the investigation, and the police ruled out the possibility that Elizabeth had staged her disappearance or run away. Mark Claus, whose daughter was kidnapped and murdered, reached out to the Smart family to offer support and share his own experiences. He noted that the internet had helped spread the word about Elizabeth's disappearance, which increased the chances of finding her. The police received information about a man named Brett Michael Edmonds, who was seen in the area around the time of Elizabeth's abduction. They searched for him, but he had relocated to New Mexico and Texas. After a chase, they arrested a man they thought was Brett, but it turned out to be the wrong person. The police investigated a man who resembled a suspect in Elizabeth's case, but they determined he was not involved. Meanwhile, they found Brett Michael Edmonds in West Virginia, where he was hospitalized due to an overdose and liver failure. Despite his critical condition, Brett was conscious and able to speak, allowing the police to question him about Elizabeth's abduction. After interviewing him, the police cleared Brett as a suspect. The police then shifted their attention to Richard Albert Ritchie, a 48-year-old man who had worked at Ed Smart's home for 2 months the previous year. Ed Smart had hired Richard and even gave him a 1990 Jeep Cherokee in exchange for his labor, unaware that Richard had a long history of criminal offenses, including burglary, robbery, and attempted murder. Richard Ritchie denied any involvement in Elizabeth's abduction and claimed to have cooperated fully with the police, providing DNA samples and sitting through 26 hours of interviews. Despite an exhaustive search of his home, the police found no evidence linking him to the abduction. As the search for Elizabeth continued, the Smart family received a promising lead when a witness reported seeing a girl matching Elizabeth's description in Nebraska. However, after investigating the report, the police found no connection to Elizabeth's case. The Smart family remained hopeful but cautious, determined to find their daughter while acknowledging the possibility of false leads. They kept an open mind, knowing that every lead, no matter how promising, had to be thoroughly investigated before they could finally be reunited with Elizabeth. Richard Ritchie was accused of burglary, a second-degree felony, and theft, a Class A misdemeanor, for stealing items from a house in Federal Heights on April 4, 2001. He was also charged with theft, a third-degree felony, for stealing jewelry and a perfume bottle worth $3,500 from the Smart house on June 6, 2001. However, these stolen items were not related to the investigation into Elizabeth Smart's kidnapping. Salt Lake District Attorney David Yoakum announced the charges in a press conference. When Ed Smart confronted Richard Ritchie about the Smart house theft, Ritchie denied it and was subsequently fired. Unfortunately, the police investigation into Elizabeth's abduction suffered a setback in August 2002 when Richard Ritchie, their prime suspect, died from a brainstem injury that caused hemorrhaging. As Ritchie's condition worsened, he lost the ability to communicate or breathe on his own. His family eventually decided to remove him from life support to prevent further suffering. Although Ritchie's death presented a significant challenge to the investigation, the authorities continued their efforts to find Elizabeth Smart's abductor. The investigation into Elizabeth Smart's kidnapping was hindered when the prime suspect was ruled out, causing doubts about the viability of other leads. Around the same time, in August 2002, an 11-year-old girl was brutally attacked and sexually assaulted in her own bedroom. The severity of her injuries was shocking, with every bone in the middle of her face broken. She required surgery, but remained in critical condition. The police arrested a close friend of her father Javier Sickler, and charged him with burglary, assault, and attempted murder. Sickler claimed to have knocked on the front door of the victim's home, but said he blacked out afterward. Despite initial similarities with Elizabeth Smart's abduction, the police investigated and determined that Javier Sickler was not involved in her kidnapping. As the months passed with no sign of Elizabeth Smart, the police investigating her abduction turned to unorthodox methods to find her. One approach involved consulting psychics who claimed to possess extrasensory perception that could provide clues about her whereabouts. The psychics told investigators that Elizabeth might be found in a crypt in the foothills above Salt Lake City. This lead prompted a Seattle-based company to come forward, stating that over a dozen of its members had pinpointed Elizabeth's body using a specialized psychic technique called technical remote viewing. According to the group, their psychic abilities revealed that Elizabeth had been killed shortly after her abduction. However, when officers searched the specified tomb, they found no evidence of Elizabeth's disappearance. In November 2002, Walter Kenneth Holloway was arrested after falsely claiming to be the kidnapper of Elizabeth Smart. He contacted the Smart family and the Salt Lake Police Department, demanding a $3 million ransom from Ed and Lois Smart in exchange for their daughter's safe return. Holloway threatened to harm Elizabeth if his demands weren't met. However, the police quickly discovered that Holloway was not involved in the abduction and was simply trying to extort money from the Smart family. They tracked him down to South Carolina and cleared him of any involvement in the case. Ed Smart was outraged by the extortion scheme, feeling that it wasted valuable police resources and distracted them from finding his daughter. In October 2002, Mary Catherine, Elizabeth's sister, had a sudden realization. The voice of her sister's abductor sounded like Emmanuel, a man the family had briefly hired to do some yard work and roofing a year earlier. However, the police had doubts about this lead because Emmanuel had only worked for the family for a short time. A lot of time had passed since the abduction, and Mary Catherine had only heard the abductor's voice briefly. Despite their skepticism, the family worked with a sketch artist to draw a picture of Emmanuel based on their descriptions. The sketch was finally released in February 2003 and was featured on several TV shows, including Larry King Live and America's Most Wanted. A relative of a man named Brian David Mitchell recognized the sketch and contacted the police, providing them with recent photos of him. These photographs enabled authorities to confirm that the sketch was an accurate representation of Brian David Mitchell. On March 12, 2003, two couples in Sandy, Utah spotted Brian David Mitchell with a woman and a girl. Recognizing him from news photos as Elizabeth Smart's abductor, they immediately called the police. Brian David Mitchell was accompanied by his wife, Wanda Barzee, when he was found with Elizabeth Smart. The police were quickly alerted and sent to the scene, where they safely rescued Elizabeth Smart and took Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee into custody. After her rescue, Elizabeth's testimony revealed a disturbing account of her 9-month ordeal. She described being taken to a hidden encampment outside Salt Lake City, where she met Wanda Barzee, who played a significant role in her captivity. The camp was a makeshift shelter surrounded by dense foliage, carefully camouflaged to avoid detection. Elizabeth Smart described Wanda Barzee as initially caring and nurturing, offering comfort and warmth. However, as time passed, Barzee's behavior changed, and she began to exert control over Elizabeth. She forced Elizabeth to follow their unusual religious beliefs, insisting that she pray, read scriptures, and participate in religious rituals. One of the most distressing experiences Elizabeth endured during her captivity was being forced to marry Brian David Mitchell. Barzee threatened Elizabeth with physical harm if she refused to comply. The wedding ceremony, which Mitchell claimed was a symbol of eternal love, was actually a sham with no legal basis. It solely served as a means for Mitchell to assert his dominance over Elizabeth. After being forced into a marriage, Brian David Mitchell assaulted Elizabeth. He justified his actions by claiming to be a king, ordained to kidnap virgin brides to fight against the Antichrist. Mitchell believed Elizabeth was the first of many virgins he would abduct, and that she would join him in this fictional battle. During her captivity, Elizabeth suffered unimaginable abuse to prevent her escape. She was chained to a tree with a metal cable, restricting her movement outside her tent. This constant confinement made her feel trapped and helpless, unable to seek freedom. In addition to physical restraint, Elizabeth was also subjected to psychological manipulation. She was forced to take on a new identity, choosing the name Esther after the biblical figure. This name change symbolized the loss of her own identity and the control exerted over her by Mitchell and his accomplice, Wanda Barzee. Elizabeth suffered severe trauma during her captivity, particularly due to the frequent and repeated sexual assaults by Brian David Mitchell, which occurred multiple times a day. This abuse left her deeply traumatized and fearful. In addition to the sexual abuse, Elizabeth was forced to look at explicit materials, which further worsened her trauma and feelings of degradation. Moreover, she lived in constant fear of violence and death, as Brian David Mitchell regularly threatened to kill her. This perpetual state of fear and uncertainty amplified the abuse she endured, leaving her feeling utterly overwhelmed and powerless. To gain more control over Elizabeth, Mitchell would often force her to consume alcohol and drugs. He used these substances to reduce her ability to resist him and make her more vulnerable to his control. As a result, Elizabeth was frequently disoriented and helpless, making it easier for her abusers to commit their atrocious acts. After a lengthy legal process, Wanda Barzee admitted to her role in Elizabeth's kidnapping and was sentenced to 15 years in both state and federal prison, with the sentences to be served concurrently. In 2016, her federal sentence was terminated, and she was transferred from a Texas prison to a Utah prison to begin serving her state sentence. When Wanda Barzee was set to be released in September 2018, Elizabeth Smart, who had become a child safety advocate, strongly objected to her release. Elizabeth believed that Barzee still posed a threat to others, as she had never shown remorse for her actions or any signs of rehabilitation. Despite Elizabeth's protests, Wanda Barzee was released from prison. Elizabeth Smart's protest attracted extensive media attention and brought to light the ongoing concerns about the release of convicted criminals from prison. After a lengthy legal battle, Brian David Mitchell was finally sentenced to life in prison for kidnapping Elizabeth. At his sentencing hearing, Elizabeth took the opportunity to confront her kidnapper directly, delivering a powerful and emotional statement. In her statement, Elizabeth described the immense pain and trauma Mitchell had inflicted upon her, explaining that the 9 months she spent in captivity had stolen a part of her life that she could never recover. Despite this horrific experience, Elizabeth demonstrated remarkable resilience and determination, assuring Mitchell that she would go on to live a good life, unperturbed by the darkness he had brought into her world. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Rob Andrew. Brenda Evers, the future wife of Rob Andrew, was born on December 16, 1963, in Enid, Oklahoma. She grew up in a devout Christian family that prioritized faith and family values. Her childhood was filled with regular family meals, group prayers, and church attendance. As a result, Brenda developed into a quiet and peaceful individual who excelled academically and spent much of her free time volunteering at church. As a high school student, Brenda was a cheerleader for the soccer team and enjoyed dancing, but she avoided parties and social gatherings. She aspired to be like her mother, who was a model of piety and modesty. Brenda's goal was to become a housewife after marriage, devoting herself to her husband and children. At the age of 17, Brenda met her first love, Rob Andrew, who was the older brother of her friend. Despite their different denominational backgrounds, Rob was a Baptist and Brenda a Lutheran. They shared conservative views on life, a strong faith, and a dream of building a large and close-knit family. The friendly relationship between them blossomed into something more. Although they were separated by 125 miles when she started college in Winfield, Kansas, they maintained regular communication. To be closer to her partner, Brenda transferred to a university in Stillwater, Ohio, a year later. They eventually got married in the summer of 1984. As Rob's career took off, he received a job offer in Houston, Texas. Although he had initially hesitated, Brenda convinced him to take the opportunity. While Rob thrived as an advertising manager, Brenda completed her degree and secured a job in banking. She fell in love with the city's vibrant nightlife, impressive skyscrapers, and fast-paced lifestyle. Her time in Texas brought about a transformation in Brenda, as she overcame her initial shyness and developed a more outgoing personality. She started taking care of her appearance, dressing fashionably, wearing makeup, and building a large social network. Rob was unhappy with the changes he saw in his wife. He believed a woman of faith should be more subdued. Additionally, Rob was homesick and eager to return to his old life. When he was offered his old job back at an advertising agency in Oklahoma City, he jumped at the opportunity. However, Brenda was not supportive of his decision. They argued about it, but eventually found a compromise. They agreed that Rob would settle in the new location, find a suitable house, and if everything worked out, Brenda would join him. They lived apart for a few months, but eventually reunited. In the early 1990s, they moved into a luxurious house in the upscale neighborhood of Lansbrook. Brenda gave birth to a daughter 9 months later. She even quit her job to become a full-time homemaker and devote herself to raising their child. 4 years later, they welcomed the son Parker. It seemed like they had the perfect life, love, children, a beautiful home, and financial security. On November 20th, 2001, Rob had arranged to pick up the children from his ex-wife to spend the holiday with them. At the time, they were divorced. In the evening, Brenda greeted him at the door and asked him to go to the garage to help her with some faulty equipment. Rob was bending down when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around, and a gunshot rang out. Around 6 p.m., emergency services received a call from Brenda Andrew. She reported that she was injured and her husband was dead. An ambulance rushed to the scene, where paramedics found a horrific scene in the garage. A man lay in a pool of blood, dead from a gunshot wound. His wife, Brenda, was shot in the arm but alive. Brenda's clothes were stained with blood, and she appeared detached from the situation. The paramedics believed she was in shock. She told them that she tried to give Rob first aid, but she thought he was dead. Brenda's hand was bandaged, and she was taken to the hospital. As the ambulance left, police began investigating the scene. They found a .22 caliber bullet lodged in the wall and a shotgun shell casing, indicating that multiple weapons were used. The officers also noticed that the victim still had his wallet on him, ruling out robbery as a motive. At the clinic, Brenda explained that she and Andrew were together when 2 masked and armed men suddenly entered the garage. Although she couldn't make out what they were shouting, one of the men shot Andrew twice, and the other wounded her as she tried to escape. The attackers then quickly fled the scene. Brenda claimed that Andrew was a kind and helpful person who didn't have any enemies. She acknowledged feeling frightened by the attack, especially since there were children in the house at the time. However, her account raised suspicions, and the police noticed several inconsistencies in her story. Notably, she mentioned that the children were present during the attack, but it was clear that they had not been prepared for a trip, contradicting her earlier statement. Interviews with neighbors yielded no useful information. To gain insight into Brenda and Rob's personal life, detectives questioned their friends and acquaintances, revealing marital problems since their second child's birth. Friends and Pastor Andrew reported that Rob confided in them about Brenda's abusive behavior and her hatred for their marriage. Ronnie Street, a close friend of the Roberts family, observed that Brenda's behavior had become unusual. She was open about her feelings, even with strangers, and her husband Rob seemed to love her unconditionally, forgiving her for her antics. Friends of the family noted that Brenda had undergone a significant change from being a typical housewife to someone with loose morals. There was substantial evidence to support these claims. Brenda seemed to be having a midlife crisis, dressing more provocatively and becoming secretive towards her husband. Rob soon discovered she was having an affair, which began in October 1997 with Rick Nunley, a co-worker from the Oklahoma bank. Brenda was married, but secretly dated someone for a year and then maintained occasional phone contact. She then started an affair with James Higgins, a local store owner, who was drawn to her bold style and flirting. They met secretly in a hotel room once or twice a week for about 5 years. Meanwhile, Brenda's husband, Rob, remained unaware of her infidelity. However, he couldn't help but notice that their marriage was falling apart. His wife had become distant, rarely speaking to him or spending time with him. Rob tried his best to hold the family together, hoping that things would eventually improve. In 2001, Brenda ended her affair with Higgins, but not because she wanted to salvage her marriage. Instead, she was sinking deeper into a life of immorality and vice. Around this time, a new Baptist church had opened in Oklahoma City, largely thanks to the efforts of Brenda's husband, Rob. He became a deacon at the church, and Brenda taught Sunday school. From the outside, it seemed like they were a perfect, moral family. Brenda, a devoted wife, taught her children about faith and community. She met James Pavitt, a part-time teacher and friend of Rob, who was drawn to her charm. As their relationship blossomed in 2001, they kept it secret but eventually became open about their feelings. Rob's suspicions of Brenda's infidelity led to a heated argument and separation. James also ended his marriage. While Rob hoped to reconcile, Brenda filed for divorce. A mysterious phone call and car malfunction followed, leading Rob to suspect James and Brenda were behind the attempt on his life. He reported his concerns to the police, raising questions about what drove him to make such a claim. Rob Andrew and his wife Brenda's divorce was already settled, including a custody agreement for their children. However, a large insurance policy taken out by James Pavitt could still financially benefit Brenda upon Rob's death. In fact, just months prior, James had sold Rob an $800,000 life insurance policy, listing Brenda as the sole beneficiary. This raised suspicions about Brenda's involvement in the recent violent attack on Rob. Detectives discovered that Brenda's new lover, James Pavitt, was involved in the insurance scheme and that Rob had tried to remove Brenda from the policy 2 weeks before the incident, but James refused, citing that only Brenda could make changes as the beneficiary. Rob didn't take his former friend's word for it, so he decided to investigate further by speaking with management. What he found out was shocking. Brenda and James had tried to forge the insurance policy by transferring ownership to Brenda, falsifying Rob's signature and backdating the document. However, Rob was assured by Pavitt's superiors that he still owned the policy and that only the policyholder could make changes to the contract. When James found out about this, he was furious, as this discovery was the reason for his termination. In a separate development, an inspection at the neighbor's house, the Gigstad's family, yielded an unexpected result. A fired shell casing from the shotgun in question was found on the bedroom floor, and several .22 caliber bullets were found in the attic. At the time of the crime, the Gigstad couple was not home, and there were no signs of forced entry. Mrs. Gigstad revealed that she had given a spare key of their home to Brenda Andrew. Additional, James's daughter, provided another crucial piece of evidence. On the day of the crime, she had lent her car to her father, who promised to have it repaired. However, when James returned the vehicle, Joanna noticed that the repairs had not been made. Moreover, she found a .22 caliber bullet in the car, which she thought was suspicious. When she told her father about the bullet, he instructed her to get rid of it. Further investigation revealed that James had purchased a handgun just a week before the attack. This new information led detectives to plan a questioning of James and Brenda. The funeral of Rob Andrews was held on November 23rd, but it was notable for the absence of Brenda, her children, and James Pavitt. Their failure to attend the ceremony raised many questions among family and friends, and also sparked concern among the police. It soon became apparent that the missing individuals had fled, leaving behind a trail of suspicion and unanswered questions. The police had a breakthrough in the case. They had identified the suspects and received the autopsy results. However, Brenda's account of the attack contradicted the forensic evidence. The police discovered that 2 different guns were used in the attack, and the injuries sustained by Rob and Brenda differed from the description provided by Brenda. The investigation revealed that the first shot was fired from a shotgun at a distance, but the second shot came from a .22 caliber pistol at close range. The same pistol was used to shoot Brenda's arm. Analysis of the bloodstains on the fabric showed that the shooter was standing near the victim when the second shot was fired. The angle of the blood matched the shooter's position, indicating that Brenda was the one who fired the second shot at Rob. Brenda and James were officially named suspects and a warrant was issued for their arrest. However, they had a substantial lead and had already gone into hiding. The police notified border officials to be on the lookout for but they had vanished. It eventually became clear that James and Brenda had fled to another country, with Mexico being the suspected destination. To capture the fugitives, the authorities froze their bank accounts, assuming that without access to their funds, they would eventually surface. This strategy proved effective, and 3 months later, James reached out to his daughter, Joanna, requesting that she send him money. Unbeknownst to James, Joanna was secretly working with the investigators. Joanna had long suspected her father's involvement in the crime, as he had been secretive and evasive with her. She recalled a previous incident where he had asked her boyfriend to pose as a doctor and call Rob, informing him that his wife was ill. It led them to discover that James and Brenda were secretly staying in Cancun, Mexico. In February 2002, James Pavitt and Brenda Andrew were arrested at the border and turned over to U.S. authorities. They were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. The children were placed in the care of their paternal grandparents. During the investigation, neither James nor Brenda cooperated or pleaded guilty. James was the first to stand trial. The prosecution presented a strong case, highlighting James' background as an Army sniper and his experience with firearms. The court also heard about James' affair with Brenda and his attempts to prevent Rob Andrew from removing Brenda as a beneficiary. The jury considered the testimony of James' daughter and physical evidence found at the scene. James was found guilty and sentenced to death. Brenda's trial followed, but it was more dramatic and revealing than James'. The prosecution focused on Brenda's personality and history of infidelity, calling her former lovers to testify. They portrayed her as someone lacking in faith and integrity. When the prosecutor questioned Brenda about her husband's murder, she claimed to be innocent and asked to be set free, citing her faith. However, the prosecutor presented a different image of Brenda, portraying her as a woman who didn't love her husband, cheated on him, and killed him for selfish reasons. To support his argument, the prosecutor showed the contents of a suitcase Brenda had taken to Mexico, which included lingerie and a book about seduction techniques. He questioned whether a grieving widow would flee her husband's funeral. In contrast, the defense team attempted to depict Brenda as a victim of the events that transpired. The defense attorney pointed out that Brenda was also injured during the attack, but forensic experts concluded that she had shot herself in the arm. The defense then produced a letter allegedly written by James, confessing to the crimes. However, handwriting analysis revealed that the document was actually forged by Brenda Andrew herself. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and Brenda Andrew was sentenced to death. Despite Brenda's repeated appeals, her conviction has been upheld. The crimes committed by Brenda and James are extremely disturbing. What makes their case even more troubling is that they presented themselves as devout and moral individuals who taught children right from wrong. This hypocrisy raises serious concerns, as people who preach one thing but do not practice it in their own lives can be unpredictable and devoid of empathy. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Roxana Valdez. Roxana Valdez was born in 1957 in a small village in the province of Punta Arenas, Chile. Roxana married a man whose name is not publicly known, and they had a son together. However, the marriage was not successful, and they separated in 2011. As a single mother, Roxana faced significant challenges in her small village, where job opportunities were limited. The community's main occupation was farming and selling produce, and the local schools focused on teaching agricultural skills. Roxana worked at the Don Gregorio boarding school, which trained students to become agricultural technicians. Her role was a night supervisor, responsible for ensuring the students' behavior and slept at night. She did not have a direct role in raising the children. Roxana's son attended the same boarding school, as she was unable to care for him during the day due to her work in the fields. At the boarding school where Roxana worked, Claudio Muñoz Ramirez was the head of grounds maintenance. His nighttime work schedule led to him meeting Roxana. Despite their 14-year age difference, they discovered they had a lot to talk about. Roxana would often spend entire nights discussing school issues and her failed marriage with Claudio. They also shared commonalities in their personal lives. Claudio had 2 daughters he loved, but he felt disconnected from their mother and had considered divorce multiple times. However, he stayed in the marriage because of a promise he made to her late father. Over time, Claudio seemed to forget his promise and began spending more time with Roxana, away from his family. Eventually, he made a decisive move without explaining himself to his wife. He packed his belongings and left their home to be with Roxana, who happily welcomed him into her life. Their relationship moved forward quickly, but Roxana overlooked some important red flags. She welcomed the man she barely knew into her home, despite having children who needed her attention. As they had enjoyable conversations, Roxana failed to notice that Claudio had a temper and could be cruel. The first major incident occurred at the boarding school, where Claudio was in charge of cleanliness. During a scheduled cleanup day, some students refused to participate, which infuriated Claudio. He threatened to beat anyone who didn't help, despite having no teaching experience. Although it's unclear if he would have followed through on this threat, the students eventually started cleaning. Later, they collectively complained to the principal about Claudio's threats of physical violence. The principal, unhappy with Claudio, asked him to resign voluntarily. This was a significant setback, as the Don Gregorio boarding school was one of the few places in the area that offered stable and decent-paying jobs. After searching for work in fields and at fruit bases, Claudio realized it was a futile effort. He and Roxana decided to look for a better life elsewhere, but they left their son at the boarding school so he could continue his education. They didn't want to take any risks by bringing him along. To avoid relying on employers, who had already let them down, Claudio and Roxana decided to start their own small business, a fruit kiosk. They moved to Molina, a commune a couple of hours from the Chilean capital, known for its vineyards and wine exports. Roxana and Claudio bought a kiosk near their new home, found suppliers for vegetables and fruits, and started their small family business. Claudio took care of purchasing and transporting products, while Roxana handled sales throughout the day. They couldn't afford to hire an employee, as it would add to their expenses, and they worried that someone else might not take care of the perishable goods properly. Claudio became visibly upset and angry when he discovered Roxana was pregnant with their first child. This was a moment that required serious thought, but Roxana, caught up in their new relationship and thriving business, agreed with Claudio's suggestion to give the baby to her relatives to raise after birth. However, Roxana suffered a miscarriage afterwards. Following this, Claudio's behavior changed significantly. He frequently yelled at Roxana and occasionally turned violent. Neighbors, tired of the constant noise, often called the Chilean police, the Carabineros, to intervene in their domestic disputes. One time, when the Carabineros responded to a call, they found Roxana in tears and partially undressed, fleeing the house with Claudio chasing after her. Roxana revealed to the officers that she was suffering from ongoing domestic abuse, which had caused her miscarriage. The incident left her needing psychological support. However, as time went by, they seemed to put their issues behind them and continued living together as if nothing had happened. After the incident, Claudio should have faced charges, but Roxana chose to forgive him and give him another chance. She made him promise that it wouldn't happen again. Although Claudio promised to change, his past behavior with his ex-wife suggested that his words might not be reliable. Sadly, the past repeated itself. Claudio stopped physically abusing Roxana, but he started going out to local bars at night, drinking heavily and spending a lot of their family's money on alcohol and encounters with women. Roxana put up with her husband's behavior, hoping that he would settle down once they had a child. In a way, she was correct. After Roxana gave birth to a healthy child in 2013, Claudio changed his ways. He stopped going out and focused on their business, which was growing and needed more attention. They expanded their business by buying another kiosk and vehicle for transporting products. Roxana also invested in firearms for protection, as they lived and worked in areas that weren't very safe. The family's assets appeared to increase substantially, but this growth was only theoretical. In reality, Claudio resumed his previous habits, wasting money on alcohol and reverting to violent behavior towards Roxana. Roxana's account detailed how the abuse in their relationship escalated. At first, Claudio drank sporadically, but the frequency soon increased. When inebriated, he would return home, accuse Roxana of fictional affairs, and subject her to physical and sexual abuse. His actions seemed intentionally hurtful, even when Roxana was pregnant. This culminated in a miscarriage in August 2012, sending Roxana into a prolonged depression. On one occasion, following his typical routine, Claudio went to a local bar and didn't come back until the next morning. Roxana, accustomed to his behavior, still felt anxious about him. It was later discovered that Claudio had taken 5 million Chilean pesos, equivalent to around $6,000, which Roxana had obtained from selling her mother's house. He spent this money on alcohol and visits to brothels. Roxana was shocked and felt betrayed when she discovered that Claudio had taken the money meant for their shared business, which was hidden in their daughter's room. When Claudio came home late that evening, Roxana confronted him about the missing money. However, Claudio was uninterested in discussing the issue and instead hit Roxana, admitting that he had squandered all the money. This incident was the final straw for Roxana. Without saying a word, she went to their bedroom, retrieved a revolver that was meant for protection against local criminals, and shot Claudio in the chest. Claudio died instantly. Roxana was surprised by her own drastic action and attempted to stop the bleeding from the gunshot wound, but it was too late. The close-range shot from the .38 caliber revolver was fatal. In her testimony, Roxana expressed deep remorse and acknowledged the immorality of her actions. She confessed that when she retrieved the revolver, her intention was not to intimidate Claudio but to kill him. Roxana remembered the numerous times Claudio abused and assaulted her, and how she failed to report him to the authorities due to fear. She was afraid of being alone, especially after they had a child together. After shooting Claudio, Roxana's main concern was how it would affect their daughter if she were imprisoned and the child was sent to an institution. That night, Roxana decided to get rid of the body and report Claudio missing. She knew the police were aware of his frequent disappearances during drinking binges. As a delicate woman, disposing of the body was a daunting task. She decided to remove it piece by piece, using kitchen knives to cut the limbs and head. The process required 5 knives, as they kept becoming dull. Roxana then boiled the dismembered parts in large pots, all while playing with her young daughter, who was unaware of what her mother was doing and what had happened to her father. Roxana's calculated approach to disposing of the body, while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for her daughter, shows the complexity and desperation of her situation. The day after cooking and cooling the body parts, Roxana packed them into separate plastic containers labeled by body part, hands, legs, head, and torso, and then placed each container into a garbage bag. She loaded the bags into her car and drove to St. Lucia to scatter them on a vacant lot. Before leaving, she cleaned her house thoroughly with bleach. However, upon arriving in St. Lucia, Roxana couldn't bring herself to dispose of the bags, despite finding a suitable location. Roxana was nervous during the drive, constantly feeling like she was being watched and fearing that the police would stop and search her car. This fear escalated into panic, prompting her to devise a backup plan involving her daughter, where she would pretend to rush her to the hospital if stopped by police. She even considered pinching her daughter to make her cry louder and make the situation more believable. Since Roxana couldn't discard the remains, she returned home and hid the bags in the garage. She then cleaned the interior of her car with bleach again and visited Claudio's relatives. She told the police that Claudio had stolen a large sum of money and hadn't been home for days, but they simply shrugged off her claims. Roxana visited her mother and brother, who were alarmed by her condition. She wasn't eating, had a glazed expression, and kept asking the same questions. The only question she answered clearly was about Claudio's absence, claiming he was delayed due to a flat tire while buying goods for their store. Overwhelmed by her thoughts and the hidden evidence, Roxana broke down and asked her brother for help. When he arrived, she revealed everything and showed him the containers. Her brother was shocked. Roxana wanted to unburden herself and share the traumatic experiences she had with Claudio, but she primarily needed her brother's help to dispose of the containers holding the body. However, her brother refused, fearing he would be implicated as an accomplice and face police involvement. He urged Roxana to confess to the Chilean police, the Carabineros, and threatened to do it himself if she didn't. Disappointed but with no alternative, Roxana decided to cooperate. That night, she went to the 4th police station to make a significant statement. The officers, who knew her, initially assumed she was there to report her problematic husband. However, they were stunned by what she revealed. Roxana was arrested on the spot. News of her arrest spread quickly, drawing numerous journalists to the station. As the journalists waited, Roxana was eventually brought out, visibly distressed and in handcuffs. Before being escorted into a police car, she exclaimed, "I was afraid he would kill me one day." At first glance, the case seemed straightforward. Roxana had confessed, provided evidence, and surrendered voluntarily. Nevertheless, Prosecutor Monica Bisos was skeptical of Roxana's easy confession and wanted a more thorough investigation. Prosecutor Bisos asked to extend Roxana's arrest to allow for further forensic examination. The goal was to determine if Claudio was still alive when his body was dismembered, which would have led to a longer sentence for Roxana. The judge agreed to a 60-day detention to continue the investigation. At the same time, Roxana's lawyer, Carolina Gutierrez, argued that Roxana committed the crime under extreme emotional distress. This could have been made worse by postpartum depression and the domestic abuse she suffered. Gutierrez highlighted Roxana's cooperation with the authorities and her voluntary confession as reasons for a more lenient sentence. However, forensic results later showed that Claudio died from a gunshot wound to the chest, disproving the prosecution's theory that he was alive during dismemberment. As a result, the factors that would have increased Roxana's sentence were dismissed. Another lawyer, Juan Pablo Cardenas, pointed out that the gun used in the murder was registered. He also noted that Roxana first reported domestic violence to the police just 20 days after they moved in together. Psychologist Rodrigo Valenzuela conducted a medical examination and presented documents to the court showing that Roxana was severely mentally unstable when the crime occurred. This instability, linked to the loss of 2 children, meant she wasn't fully aware of her actions. Additionally, forensic results revealed that Claudio had a high blood alcohol level at the time of his death on April 17, 2015. Roxana's trial began after a year of investigations and evidence gathering. During the trial, Roxana refused to make statements due to her distress over the media portrayal. Prosecutors emphasized the severity of the crime, but couldn't prove premeditation. The defense argued that Roxana acted in self-defense against a man who had brutally mistreated her for years. The court hearing in Chile lasted several weeks, captivating the entire nation. Prosecutor Monica sought a 15-year prison term for Roxana, the accused. After considering the defense and the jury's input, the judges sentenced Roxana to 6 years in a correctional facility with a relatively lenient regime. Claudio's family, who had hoped for a life sentence or even the death penalty for Roxana, were outraged by the court's decision. They had already been upset when the prosecutor requested a 15-year sentence, which they felt was too lenient. The family attempted to downplay any history of domestic violence and claimed that Claudio, a financially independent businessman, would not have stolen $6,000 from Roxana. Additionally, they alleged that Claudio had confided in them about Roxana's threatening behavior, stating that she would often retrieve a revolver from the closet and threaten to kill him. In a press interview, Claudio's sister shifted the blame to the Chilean state, arguing that the country's judicial system is corrupt and fails to deliver justice, as evidenced by the relatively short sentence given to Roxana, which she compared to punishments for minor thefts. Giselle, Claudio's first wife, spoke out in his defense. She stated that Claudio was never violent during their many years together. In contrast, Roxana frequently started arguments due to her jealousy and possessiveness. Roxana was initially imprisoned, but after serving 2/3 of her sentence, she was transferred to a semi-open education center in Tala for good behavior. She was allowed to stay in contact with her daughter and was eventually released early. The media reignited public interest in the case, and many people were outraged by her early release. However, some individuals, despite viewing Roxana as a murderer, believed her actions were justified because they saw her as a victim. The debate surrounding this case continues to this day. This story emphasizes the severe consequences that can occur when domestic violence is not addressed promptly. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kimberly Antonakis. Kimberly Antonakis was born in 1974 in New York, USA. She was the only child in the family. Despite the fact that she grew up in love and affluence, she was not pampered. Her parents came from simple families. Nevertheless, her father Thomas managed to achieve considerable heights. He created his own company, which was engaged in computers, earned funds. The man was happy to spend on his favorite daughter and her desires. When Kimberly was a little girl, her parents divorced. The child was left to live with her mother. However, this did not weaken the connection between the little girl and her father. He took her on weekends and spent all his free time with her. When Kimberly's mother found a new man and decided to move to Florida, she faced a choice to stay with her mother or with her father. Since she didn't want to move, the young lady decided to live with her father. Kimberly was very close to her father and enjoyed living with him. As she grew up, she became a well-behaved, sociable child and eventually a stunning young woman with a radiant smile that always lifted her spirits. She had a great sense of humor and a positive attitude. Kimberly was raised in a sheltered environment, surrounded by love and care, which protected her from the harsh realities of life. As a result, she only saw the good in people and was largely unaware of the darker aspects of life. Unfortunately, her open and kind nature would eventually lead to many sorrows. In 1994, Kimberly enrolled at the College of Staten Island. Shortly after, she told her father that she felt ready to live on her own. Although Mr. Kimberly was worried about her decision, he respected her independence and decided not to oppose it. He promised himself that he would do his best to ensure her safety and well-being in her new living arrangements. Kimberly bought a nice apartment for his daughter, located in a wealthy area of the city, and installed an alarm system to ensure her safety. He also purchased a parking space in the garage across the street so she wouldn't have to park far away. To stay in touch, he provided her with a cell phone and a pager. Kimberly did everything in his power to ensure his daughter's well-being. His concerns for her safety were well-founded, given his wealth and her limited life experience. Kimberly was a diligent student who also worked part-time as an accountant at a reputable firm. She had declined her father's offer to join the family business, opting instead to forge her own path. Kimberly led a typical student life, attending parties and socializing with friends. She declined her father's offers to return home, wanting to maintain independence. This led to an unexpected situation when she let friend Liz Pace and her family stay while their apartment was being renovated in early 1995. Kimberly, with a kind heart, invited young people to her lodging. They spent days having fun together. One day, Kimberly and a friend attended a party, getting ready and dressing up. After a fun night of dancing, Kimberly drove them home but didn't go up, citing unfinished business. They hugged goodbye, unaware they'd never see each other again. After visiting the police, Mr. Kimberly's father, went to the parking lot next to her house, only to find that her car was missing from the garage. As he looked around, he spotted a shiny object on the floor near the wall, a small gold earring. He recalled giving his daughter similar earrings and, just in case, picked it up. However, Kimberly was nowhere to be found in the apartment. Instead, he met her guests, including a friend, her boyfriend Joshua Torres, and their 2-year-old child. Although Kimberly was aware of Kimberly's decision, he didn't agree with it. The tenants were worried about the hostess's absence and Joshua offered to help find her. He said he was looking for Kimberly and would assist later. Kimberly returned to the police station, explaining that his daughter had been in an accident, but the officers remained unconvinced. Kimberly decided to speak with Liz Pace, the last person to see Kimberly, and showed her the jewelry he had found. Liz Pace confirmed that she had seen Kimberly wearing those earrings on the night she disappeared. Kimberly then visited the places his daughter frequently went to, talking to many people, but didn't gather any significant information. Joshua suggested searching not only for Kimberly but also for her distinctive car. Kimberly went to the police station for the 3rd time, insisting that he wouldn't leave until they began a search. A detective eventually responded to his appeal, agreeing to take on the investigation despite the usual protocol. To better understand the events surrounding Kimberly Antonakis' disappearance, investigators started by reconstructing her activities on February 28. Kimberly began the day by attending college, followed by a few hours of work. After work, she returned home and had dinner with friends before heading out to a party with a friend named Liz Pace. The evening concluded with their return home around 4 a.m. Following her return, Kimberly went to the parking lot for reasons that remain unclear. Both her apartment and garage were thoroughly searched, but no signs of struggle or foreign fingerprints were found. This lack of evidence suggested either a meticulous cleanup or that any potential intruder may have worn gloves. The most puzzling aspect was the disappearance of Kimberly and her car without any trace, except for a single earring that was found. An analysis of Kimberly's bank account revealed that her last transaction occurred the evening before she vanished, ruling out the possibility that she had run away from home. Based on the evidence, detectives hypothesized that Kimberly was likely kidnapped. The investigation expanded to include additional police officers. Due to the lack of concrete leads, law enforcement considered information from a psychic. Witness interviews began with Liz Pace and Joshua. They revealed 65 calls were made from Kimberly's landline on March 1st. Joshua explained he made these calls to locate Kimberly, who was like a little sister to him. Liz Pace's testimony helped determine Kimberly's clothing and a portrait was created, highlighting her distinctive tattoos, including a scorpion and infinity sign. Meanwhile, a search for the missing car was underway, with checks at scrap metal collection points and other locations where the vehicle might be found. Unfortunately, no positive results were obtained. A check of Kimberly's cell phone was also unsuccessful. Police advised Kimberly to pay attention to any letters or phone calls he received, as they might be from Kimberly's kidnappers demanding a ransom. The Kimberly family remained in a state of uncertainty until March 4th. At approximately 2 a.m., emergency services responded to a reported fire at a large, abandoned house located at 86 Woodhaven Avenue in Queens. Multiple fire crews battled the blaze until it was finally extinguished. Upon investigation, a charred body was discovered in the basement of the building. Further analysis by forensic experts revealed the deceased was a woman between 20 to 25 years old, with remnants of long, black hair still intact. There were also signs of tape and evidence that her legs had been bound, with her hands tied behind her back. The most disturbing aspect, however, was that she was alive at the time of the fire, as indicated by the presence of smoke in her lungs. Detectives initially suspected that the body might belong to Kimberly, a missing person. To confirm the identity, dental records were required. Meanwhile, an inspection of the ashes and the air revealed the scent of gasoline, strongly suggesting that the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence of a serious crime. Despite the absence of other evidence, the charred body remained, and upon closer examination, specialists found tattoos matching the description of the missing woman. The records from the dental clinic supported the investigation's suspicions, leading to the discovery of Kimberly Antonakis's body. As more details emerged, an eyewitness came forward who often walked his dog in the area. The dog had been acting strangely in the days prior to the fire, appearing nervous and barking at the house for no apparent reason. It wasn't until after the fire and the discovery of the body that the cause of the dog's behavior became clear. She had attempted to escape and called for help, but her cries went unheard by humans. However, the dog's acute hearing allowed it to detect the sounds coming from the basement, explaining its unusual behavior. When questioned by officers, the homeowner revealed that he had visited the building multiple times in recent days. He was trying to sell the house and would regularly check on its condition, collect mail, and pick up receipts. However, he only inspected the house from the outside and never went into the basement. The homeowner claimed he never heard any suspicious noises, and if he had, he would have investigated. Investigators decided to re-question Joshua, as they had some reservations about him. They also found it strangely coincidental that his name started with the letter J. This time, Joshua mentioned a person he hadn't been able to contact the day Kimberly went missing, a young man nicknamed Psycho, a Russian national who had previously dated Kimberly. The detectives looked into this new information and discovered that the Russian had moved to the US with his parents at a young age. As he grew older, he became involved with a gang and had a history of breaking the law. This led to the identification of the first suspect, who was soon taken into custody. During interrogation, Psycho was informed of his former lover's death, but his reaction shocked the detectives. The young man not only denied involvement in the crime, but he also showed genuine emotional distress. Investigators took him to the crime scene to observe his behavior, and it became clear to everyone that they had the wrong person in custody. Later, his alibi was confirmed, leaving the investigation at a standstill once again. The victim's family sought the psychic's help again. This time, she claimed to have seen 4 people involved in the crime. According to her, the kidnappers had initially intended to establish communication but failed. The kidnapping didn't seem to have been planned with a tragic outcome. The psychic concluded that new information would emerge soon. A couple of days later, Mr. Kimberly, hoping to gather some leads, announced a $10,000 reward for information that could help catch the perpetrator. Mr. Kimberly couldn't shake off the psychic's words. He pondered the psychic's statement about the kidnappers wanting to make contact. What could that mean, and what had prevented them from doing so? Upon returning home, he sat at the table and stared at his phone for a while. He suddenly recalled a minor detail from the day Kimberly went missing. He had listened to all the answering machine recordings as he had been expecting his girl to contact him. However, there were no messages, except for 2 blank ones with complete silence. He initially thought it was a technical issue or a problem with the connection. But it later became clear that this was not the case. 5 days after her body was found, the police located her car in a quiet area of town, not far from where her body was discovered. The investigators were hoping to find fingerprints in the car, but it had been thoroughly cleaned. The only evidence they found was her hair and a second earring in the passenger compartment. Although it seemed like a breakthrough, it didn't lead anywhere. Kimberly, her father, was linked to a local mob hit due to his wealth and success. However, detectives found no evidence to support the rumors. Kimberly, grieving the loss of his daughter, denied any involvement and was found to conduct his business openly and honestly. In July 1995, a burglary suspect was arrested at a New York City residence. Surprisingly, he shared information about the Kimberly case. The suspect claimed an acquaintance told him that his friends had kidnapped and killed she by burning her. Upon hearing the unidentified man's name, the officers pieced together the crime. The man in question was Joshua Torres, Kimberly's roommate who had participated in the search for her. Detectives took a closer look at the young man, calling him in for further questioning. Although he denied any involvement in the crime, a lengthy conversation revealed a potentially incriminating statement. He mentioned that if he were the kidnapper, he would have fed the victim Kimberly. This statement raised suspicions since there had been no public mention of the victim's hunger, thirst, or cold, and not even her father was aware of these details. To strengthen their case, investigators examined the suspect's past, finding a criminal record and a pattern of obsessive behavior. He was jobless and financially dependent on his roommate, caring for her child, which gave him unmonitored time to plan the crime. Knowing Kimberly's daily routine allowed him to abduct her and hide her in a vacant house. It was unclear why no ransom demands were made. Analyzing the suspect's calls revealed he lied about contacting Kimberly's acquaintances. The dialed numbers belonged to random individuals with no connection to Kimberly. Suspicious messages on his pager further implicated the suspect, Joshua. He had long been a suspect in the eyes of detectives, and they finally gathered enough evidence to arrest him. During the interrogation, they informed him that Kimberly's ex-boyfriend was no longer considered a suspect. Pressed for more information, Torres revealed that he suspected his friends of being responsible for her murder. Torres claimed that he thought his friends only intended to kidnap Kimberly for ransom and then release her unharmed. He admitted to being an accessory to the kidnapping but maintained that he did not think his friends would resort to violence. According to Torres, the plan was to demand a ransom and then let Kimberly go, but things did not go as planned. The kidnappers became frustrated when their ransom demands were met with silence from Mr. Kimberly. Unbeknownst to them, their calls had been answered by Kimberly's father, and a ransom message had even been recorded. However, due to a technical issue, the recording was not saved on the answering machine. The kidnappers, feeling ignored and angered by the lack of response, decided to wait and see how events would unfold. It turns out the group feared public attention, and the psychics claim that the suspect's name began with the letter J. This information was published and broadcast on TV, creating a cycle of events. Joshua was released on bail after speaking with the police, but then disappeared. Around the same time, Jose was shot while walking with his wife. Jose's wife later told investigators that her husband didn't trust Joshua and had been gathering evidence against him. She claimed Jose felt guilty about kidnapping Kimberly but not about the house fire. He wanted to confess to the police, just as he had to her. The pager messages and suspect statements helped investigators piece together the kidnapping and crime details. 4 men were involved: Joshua, Julio Negrin, Jose Negrin, and Nicholas Brett, also known as Jay. Notably, Julio had previously dated Kimberly and proposed, but she rejected him. The group was united by friendship and a shared criminal past. However, their actions were far surpassed by the horrific treatment of she at the hands of the guys. Nicholas had recently been released on bail, thanks to his mother's intervention, and had received a lenient fine for a crime that could have resulted in a prison sentence of over a year. Joshua had a history of serious offenses, including child abduction, violence against a minor, and illegal possession of weapons, despite his young age. Nevertheless, he too had received an inappropriately light sentence for his crimes. It was evident that Joshua was the ringleader, responsible for coordinating the group's actions. After Kimberly left the party, the men seized her in the parking lot, having apparently been stalking her and waiting for the ideal moment to strike when she was alone. A gun was used to intimidate Kimberly. When she resisted, the perpetrators tied her hands and covered her mouth, eyes, and ears with duct tape. They then put her in the trunk of a car and drove her to an abandoned house, where she was taken to the basement and tied to a chair. To prevent her from making noise, they removed her shoes. The kidnappers told Kimberly that her father owed them money and that she would be released once he paid the debt. Julio was tasked with caring for Kimberly, bringing her food and water twice a day, and keeping her warm. However, fearing the consequences, Julio abandoned the house, leaving Kimberly without food, water, or warmth for 3 days. Once Julio left, the kidnappers informed Joshua, who made an audio recording demanding a ransom of $775,000. Then, the kidnapper called Kimberly's father, leaving 2 empty messages. The kidnappers waited for a response, genuinely confused as to why Kimberly's father didn't contact them. Meanwhile, Kimberly, left unattended, suffered from dehydration, passing out multiple times, yet continued to fight for her life. The kidnappers grew angry and fearful of being caught due to the lack of ransom payment, so they decided to release Kimberly. Upon entering the basement, they found her unconscious and assumed she was dead. To eliminate evidence in the hostage, they planned to get rid of her. During the investigation, officers learned from Liz Pace that Joshua used his roommate as an alibi, directing his accomplices while staying at home with his child. Liz Pace initially claimed she was unaware of Joshua's involvement in Kimberly's kidnapping. However, at the trial, she testified against him. She stated that after being interrogated, Joshua approached her and confessed to all his crimes. However, he then turned violent, physically assaulting her, silencing her, and issuing death threats before fleeing. Some time later, Joshua was apprehended by law enforcement. In an effort to further the investigation, the authorities decided to bring the former friends together, informing them that Joshua had denied any involvement in the massacre. Upon learning of Joshua's denial, Julio chose to cooperate with the investigation, revealing crucial information. This cooperation played a pivotal role in securing Torres' conviction for Kimberly's murder. Ultimately, the trio faced charges of murder, arson, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment. During the trial, evidence emerged that Joshua had made repeated attempts to deceive investigators and evade punishment. After deliberating for approximately 10 hours, the jury reached a verdict. Joshua Torres was sentenced to 58 years in prison. Nicholas Brett received the same sentence as the others. Julio Negrin was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact and was sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison. Tomas Kimberly, the victim's family member, was satisfied with the court's verdict and did not want the perpetrators to receive the death penalty. In his opinion, the death penalty would have been too lenient a punishment. Nicholas Brett was repeatedly abused and assaulted in prison and died of AIDS after serving 2 years. Julio Negrin was released after serving his 2-year sentence. Joshua will not be eligible for release until 2053 at the earliest. Tragically, sadly, Kimberly's father, Kimberly, passed away from cancer in 2005. His family believes that the stress and grief caused by his daughter's death contributed to his illness. The life of Kimberly Antonakis, a beautiful young girl, was cut short in a shocking and devastating manner. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Hannah Clark. Hannah Clark was born on September 8, 1988. By 2020, she was a devoted mother of 3 young children, 2 sweet girls, Aaliyah and Liana, and a rambunctious boy named Trey. Hannah's loved ones remember her as a kind and gentle soul with a bright smile that could light up anyone's heart. She was a selfless and caring mother who gave her all to her children. Hannah's family life was marked by her relationship with her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, a rugby player for the New Zealand Warriors team. Despite their significant age difference, they formed a strong bond, which deepened over time. Sue Clark, Hannah's mother, struggled to accept Rowan, but Hannah refused to listen to her concerns. People close to Rowan shared negative opinions about him. Sue, Hannah's mother, had a nagging feeling that something was off about Rowan. She perceived him as arrogant and self-centered, which made her uneasy. She was also concerned about the significant age gap between Rowan and Hannah. When they first met, Hannah was a recent graduate, while Rowan was 31 years old. Additionally, Rowan's past relationships were a worry for Sue, particularly since he was still in the process of divorcing his previous wife and was living with her at the time. When Hannah introduced Rowan to her parents, they questioned him about his ex-wife. Rowan explained that he was staying with her due to their son. Eventually, Rowan finalized his divorce and continued his relationship with Hannah. In 2011, he proposed to her, and she accepted. They got married in Kingsley, New South Wales, Australia. The following year, they had 3 children together. Hannah and her family, including her father Rowan, were passionate about sports. However, Rowan's muscular physique, developed during his professional athlete days, was partly due to steroid use, which led to mental health issues. As a personal trainer, Hannah's approach differed from her father's. She was loved by her clients for her kindness, empathy, and dedication, earning her a loyal following. Rowan's approach to training was unique, but his behavior was marred by aggression and inappropriateness, likely caused by steroid use. This made him a poor trainer, as clients don't need someone who makes them feel uncomfortable. Rowan struggled to communicate effectively with people, which negatively impacted his career and finances. As a result, his wife Hannah had to become the primary breadwinner, which further irritated Rowan. He felt emasculated by her success, as she was doing a better job than he was. Despite their financial struggles, they decided to open their own fitness club. However, this decision was largely driven by Rowan's desire to control Hannah's every move and monitor her whereabouts. Rowan's behavior in the store mirrored his past actions at the gyms where he worked. He often felt the need to assert superiority over women. During a private training session with Sue's mother, he showed his cruel side, acting inappropriately instead of showing respect. He dropped Sue, causing her to hit her head and bleed, and laughed at her clumsiness, showing no sympathy. Despite this alarming behavior, Hannah's parents tried to accept him for their daughter's sake. Rowan's control over Hannah was all-encompassing, and he isolated her from her family and friends. He dictated who she could see and when, and even forbade the children from visiting their grandmother and Hannah from communicating with her brother, whom he disliked. As a result, Hannah felt trapped and enslaved, confined to the walls of her own home. Rowan's behavior towards Hannah was also emotionally and physically abusive. He would demand intimacy from her, and if she refused, he would become enraged, taking out his anger on her and the children. After forcing himself on her, he would then apologize insincerely, attributing his behavior to a burst of passion. Hannah's life was slowly under the constant control and cruelty of her husband, Rowan. Their marriage, once filled with love and passion, had degenerated into a nightmare of fear and submission. Rowan's tyrannical behavior had created a toxic environment where Hannah lived in constant terror of his wrath. Rowan's cruelty was not limited to Hannah, he also targeted their children. While some playful exchanges between parents and children are normal, Rowan frequently crossed the line, intentionally hurting and belittling them. When the children cried, he would mock them, showing no empathy or respect for their feelings. For example, a conflict between Rowan and his daughter Aaliyah turned disastrous when Rowan used excessive force, causing Aaliyah to hit her head. The injury was severe enough to require hospitalization and stitches. Instead of taking responsibility and apologizing, Rowan blamed Aaliyah for the incident. This was not an isolated incident, as Rowan had a history of tormenting his children. As an athlete, he would take ice baths after training, but he would also force his children, including his young son Trey, to sit in icy water, disregarding their tears and pleas for mercy. In the same year, Hannah's life took a drastic turn for the worse. Rowan, who had recently become interested in jiu-jitsu, returned home from a training session one day, still pumped up with adrenaline. Without warning, he physically attacked Hannah, grabbing her throat with a tight grip and uttering terrifying words. Consumed by fear, Hannah didn't immediately recognize that she was experiencing domestic violence. However, this incident was far more frightening than anything she had previously endured. As a result, Hannah made up her mind to leave Rowan at the earliest chance. After reaching out to the police, she provided a detailed account of the horrific experience to the officer. The police officer informed Hannah that forcing an intimate relationship without consent is a form of domestic violence. This conversation was a turning point for Hannah, helping her understand the situation and prompting her to take immediate action. She quickly gathered her children and left for her parents' house, trying to escape the abusive situation. Although their divorce was not yet finalized in November 2019, Hannah made the decision to allow Rowan to spend time with their children. However, she was aware that she had no legal authority to control this arrangement without a court's intervention. Even so, Hannah was still uneasy about leaving the children in Rowan's care. To fix his problem, Rowan was struggling to cope with his emotions and sought help from his church's pastor, Christopher. Christopher was a kind and supportive person who was always willing to listen. However, as Rowan began to open up to him, Christopher noticed some disturbing traits. Rowan had a desire for dominance and control, which he occasionally revealed when his confidence faltered. During one of these moments, Rowan confessed to Christopher that he was aware his actions were wrong and wanted to change, but didn't know how. Rowan's admission was a crucial step towards reform, and Christopher's guidance could have been instrumental in helping him. However, before progress could be made, a shocking event occurred. Hannah and her children were walking down the street when Rowan suddenly appeared out of nowhere, grabbed their daughter Lion, and disappeared. Hannah's life was turned upside down by unbearable anxiety and fear for her daughter Lion's safety. For 2 agonizing days, she had no idea where Lion was, and her distress grew by the minute. Hannah turned to the police, who launched a search and eventually found Lion safe and sound with her father. Although Lion was unharmed, the traumatic experience left a lasting impact on Hannah. The police, recognizing the danger that Hannah and her children faced, urged her to file a police report against her ex and obtain a protection order. However, despite the problems her ex, Rowan, had caused, he still had joint custody of the children, which he used to continue manipulating and abusing Hannah. After a meeting with Rowan, the children were returned to Hannah's parents. However, before leaving, Rowan attempted to humiliate Hannah by displaying pictures of her in her underwear on his car, in plain sight of their children. Hannah, enraged, tried to remove the photos, but Rowan responded violently. He grabbed her shoulder, twisted her arm, and punched her in the face, splitting her lip. The attack was only stopped when Hannah's mother, Sue, intervened. As Rowan drove away, he yelled insults. Hannah, traumatized, immediately reported the incident to the police, as it was a clear violation of the protection order. Unfortunately, the authorities were unable to respond in time, which ultimately led to a tragic outcome. It was a typical morning on February 19, 2020. Hannah grabbed her car keys and left her parents' house to drop off her 3 kids at kindergarten. Hannah and her children got into the car, but before they could leave, Rowan jumped in, causing Hannah to become frightened for their safety. She tried to calm Rowan down, but he was furious and began yelling threats and ordering Hannah to start the car and drive away. Hannah carefully drove off, trying not to escalate the situation. As she turned onto Raven Street, the car stopped. In a desperate and vengeful act, Rowan grabbed a canister of gasoline from under the car seat and drenched Hannah and her children with it. Michael ZCK, who happened to be nearby, witnessed the horrific scene. He said that earlier that morning, he had heard a car pull up outside his house. Hannah, frantic and pleading for help, screamed that Rowan was trying to kill her and pouring gasoline all over them. As Hannah begged for mercy, Rowan refused to let her go, his face twisted in a rage. Michael rushed to the car and was met with Rowan's emotionless face, holding a lighter in his hand. In the next moment, the car erupted in flames. The explosion was followed by blood-curdling screams, a deafening ringing, and then an eerie silence. Luckily, Hannah had narrowly escaped the inferno, but was left with severe burns and bleeding. Frantically, she pleaded for assistance, not for her own suffering, but for her children who remained trapped in the blazing car. A car happened to drive by, and a doctor who was not on duty stopped to offer assistance. Seeing Hannah's distress, the doctor rushed to her side. Meanwhile, Michael intervened quickly, grabbing a hose from his house to try and extinguish the flames. However, the fire was too intense, and it engulfed the entire car, leaving no hope of rescuing the children. The doctor and Michael yelled at Hannah to take cover and get away from the fire, but she was too consumed by grief to hear them. With growing desperation, Michael rushed to the car to rescue the children, but the intense flames and scorching heat thwarted his efforts. Hannah lay on the road, her body badly burned, repeatedly begging for someone to save her children. At that moment, no one grasped the full extent of the tragedy. Hannah's body was severely burned, with over 97% of her skin damaged, except for her feet. Despite her excruciating pain, Hannah's thoughts were consumed by her children, who were now left vulnerable and unprotected. Hannah's badly burned body left police doubting her survival chances. Yet, she refused to give up. With fierce determination, she provided a crucial testimony. Police officer Angus Cook carefully recorded every word Hannah spoke as she struggled to recount the events leading up to her tragic situation. With great difficulty, Hannah managed to name her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, as the person responsible for her ordeal and provided a detailed account of what had happened. As Hannah's voice grew weaker and her body frail, Officer Angus remained by her side, offering words of encouragement and praise for her bravery. He reassured her that she had already done enough and that everything would be okay. Hannah was on the brink of death, yet she didn't fully grasp the horror unfolding around her. When questioned about whether Rowan had threatened her earlier, she replied that he hadn't. As doctors approached to alleviate her suffering, she lost the ability to speak. Meanwhile, Rowan Baxter's behavior was erratic. Despite suffering severe burns covering 80% of his body, he managed to exit the car unassisted. Rowan sat on the road, staring at the burning vehicle. After a brief moment, he inexplicably climbed back into the car, which was engulfed in flames. A witness, putting their own life at risk, attempted to extinguish the fire at the back of the car. It was then that Rowan retrieved a knife from the vehicle and began to chase people away, preventing them from putting out the flames. The children, trapped in the burning car, had little chance of survival. Nevertheless, bystanders refused to give up their efforts to save them. Rowan refused to let anyone approach the car, claimed them to a horrific death. In a final, selfish act, he stabbed himself with the knife. Despite her own life-threatening injuries, her primary concern was for the health of her children and her desire to reveal the truth. Tragically, Hannah passed away in the hospital on the same day, at the young age of 31. Hannah was a victim of severe domestic violence, which also affected her children. She fought tirelessly to protect her family from their abuser, but sadly, her efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Throughout her daily struggles, Hannah showed immense courage, standing up for her loved ones despite the numerous challenges she faced. For days later, a massive gathering took place to pay tribute to Hannah and her children. A lasting memorial, Hannah's House, was also created in Camp Hill, where a tree planting ceremony was held in her honor, accompanied by a plaque that tells the story of her life.